try with item C1, the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, let's stand.
Students, please pledge.
Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have Spanish translation available.
Sandra Trujillo is here tonight.
Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Sarvis. Buenas noches. Mi nombre es Sandra y soy la intérprete para la reunión de esta noche. Si alguien necesita ayuda con la interpretación, por favor venir a verme para darles unos audífonos. Voy a estar en la parte trasera del salón. Gracias. Thank you.
We have headsets for the hearing impaired. We have headsets for the hearing impaired. Introductions, proclamations, presentations, and recognitions. Dr.
We
Sarvis?
do have one presentation tonight. Music teacher Karen Dutton and members of the Santa Barbara Junior High School Orchestra are with us this evening, and many of their families. And I see Mr. Vecchio and his family is here as well. Ms. Dutton?
We're going to perform two pieces for you this evening. The first one is a pretty traditional orchestra piece I think you'll recognize. The second piece is called Porto De Libertad, and a lot of the string music being written right now is kind of hip to get these kids really liking playing a string instrument. And this is not your typical string orchestra class. It's not your come in, be quiet, let's play the scales orchestra class. These guys have more energy than I can sometimes keep up with, but they're a fantastic class. Last year, I had 3 violins embedded into my advanced band class. This year, you're looking at my string orchestra. So thank you, H&I funds, H funds for the junior high, and hopefully next year, this group will be even twice as big because the elementary group, as you'll see at the Honor Band concert February 5th, has grown tremendously, and the String Festival is March 17th, so we've got some really fun things coming up for the kids to perform in. So enjoy.
While you're getting set, I'm so pleased you mentioned how Parcel Tax Measure H and I have both grown our music program. Thank you.
They don't like this one too much, you'll see.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Dunn. This is fantastic. And students, Saturday night at 5 o'clock, make sure your parents watch, and you watch Channel 18. You'll be on TV, right, almost at 5 o'clock, probably 5:10. So make sure you watch your TV. There it is up on the screen now. Channel 18, 5 o'clock on Saturday. Okay, thank you once again, all of you students, and Mrs. Dunn, fantastic.
You're welcome. If you give us a minute, we'll get out of your way.
And I just, as a parent, I want to invite you to come and see the mariachi group, the band, the jazz band, the drum line.
They're fabulous. I mean, I was blown away the last concert that all those children did. So,
Mr. Heron, we'll get all those dates and we'll get them to the board. We'll
awesome.
get them to you through
Dr.
Barber County, but I believe
That's
Dr.
Dr.
Noel
Noel.
wants to say something.
I want to commend, I want to commend a lot of people because what we see now is like a miracle. And I'm not that you guys require a miracle, but the very fact that you're here, it wasn't all that long ago when the music program at Santa Barbara Junior High School was decimated. And to see, 15 kids here in a string orchestra, there must be as many players of other instruments. It's an incredible revival, and I want to give special credit to those who had the foresight to do the parcel tax. As you say, Dr. Sarvis, this is your taxpayer's dollar at work. Okay, Lanny Ebenstein, outside the district, a member of the community, brought in the idea that we should do it. The board seized upon it, and the people supported it. Here's the result. It is fabulous.
Thank you very much.
Excellent.
Especially strong with the old section. One night, really intense.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and say that? Could we add a little bit of information to this?
Could I add just
Yes.
a little bit? I
Please.
also want to commend Karen Dutton and our other elementary music, instrumental music instructor, Nancy Matheson, because before the parcel tax even came in, we were thinking about it. They too, the two of them together, started our violins in 4th grade without any additional funding. They just worked day and nights, all summer, weekends, to get that going. And we're now seeing some of those students who started out with 4th grade violins a couple of years back. And so I think they also need to be greatly commended for this.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Those people in Seattle who are so proud of their system that produces these prize-winning bands, watch out.
Watch out.
Here comes Santa Barbara.
Here we come.
Dr.
But it
Sarvis,
takes a system.
your superintendent's report?
Well, I do have a number of items to report on. Last Friday, all Harding students and staff boarded buses and headed to UCSB for a special ceremony to sign a memorandum of understanding as the school became the Harding University Partnership School, and the official designation is on our consent agenda tonight. We decided upon that at the last meeting. Following the ceremony, groups of students participated in grade level activities in a lot of different subject areas: in archaeology, circuits, motors, minerals and maps, air pressure, and propulsion. There was a lot of activity all over the university campus. To borrow the words of Humphrey Bogart in Casablanca, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. At another school, while the Santa Barbara Community Academy principal Eric Nichols is on extended leave, Abby Vasquez, who has been a teacher on special assignment here for a couple of years, and board, you've seen her before. Maybe we should bring her in and introduce you to her more formally. But Abby Vasquez has stepped in to provide leadership at the school for the interim as head teacher administrative designee. I believe yesterday in our e-news we called her teacher in charge. We already have a teacher in charge at that school. She's the head teacher at the school. Today, county superintendents received a letter of gratitude from the Santa Barbara Public Health Department for our collaboration on the pandemic H1N1 flu response. School district involvement was crucial as children were the group hardest hit by the pandemic. Dr. Hasler, the interim health officer, feels that the school's efforts across the county prevented and reduced suffering, sickness, and death among our community's children. At another school, the Dos Pueblos High School's Engineering Academy continues to move forward. And I'll announce this now, but we have an item on the agenda, so we'll be coming back to naming The goal of raising $3 million is a goal that we are a step closer to, and we expect to receive $3 million in state matching funds. Last week, the Academy received its first national corporate donation from Raytheon. The $175,000 donation means that the capital campaign has passed the $2 million mark, so we'll be pleased to come to that a little later. We have Sandy Seal with us tonight and Mark Swanitz. The board brief. My office regularly issues a report to the board called the board brief. It's a collection of reports and news items on school and district matters. A copy of the board brief is available in the reception area or from my office. Looking ahead, on Thursday, this Thursday, just 2 days from now, January 28th, there will be a free community seminar at the Marjorie Luke Theater on internet safety. It's an opportunity for parents to learn about what kids are really doing online and what they can do to protect their children. You know, there are a lot of dangers lurking on the internet, whether it's kids posting inappropriate information or predatory behavior on the parts of others. There are a lot of things to be looking out for, so we're pleased to bring this to our parents. Upcoming events in February. First, the District Honor Band performs at the Marjorie Luke on February 5, and San Marcos High School's Royal Blue Review is on February 18 and 19. Please visit our website, which is shown on the board, for more information on school events. And that's it for the superintendent's report tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Sarvis. Board, you'll notice item C2 is now board comments and correspondence. It typically has been at the end of the meeting. I've moved it forward just to test it out. Give us a little bit more leisurely time to talk about things that are going on in the district. Anybody have anything on their mind that they've done or want to talk about? Dr. Noel?
My comment is that I'm very happy to see comments at the early part of the agenda. That's all.
Okay. Oh, Mr. Cordero?
I just wanted to report that I attended the Cesar Chavez Charter School Governance Council meeting last night as the board liaison, and they want to report that they are moving forward. I think the administration is very well aware of this. They're moving forward with planning the new charter and also making some very important headway, I think, in restructuring the school even for the current school year and trying to make some improvements there. So I give them a lot of credit. They're doing a lot of very hard work. And then I also just wanted to quickly ask regarding the superintendent's report. Dr. Sarvis, if you recall, I think a few months ago, you had been giving us for a little while a list of the upcoming events.
Yes.
And I don't think we've been getting those anymore.
Oh, okay.
And
I'll make
those
sure
were-
that you do.
Those were actually
Good.
quite useful, so thank you.
Good.
I'll quickly comment. Mrs. Parker and I both were at the MOU signing at UCSB, and it was a tremendous event to see that many children be so good for so long, and to watch them marching off to their different assignments. And I heard many, many comments, and in many cases, just the ride out to UCSB was the highlight to a lot of the students. You know, just that they expressed that was so unique to them, which is really good. But I also went for the second time, I went last year, to the 31st Annual Arts Scholarship Awards, where 15 of our high school students presented their artwork. And then, again, Patsy Hicks talked about each student and each student's work. And she did it in a way that was just unbelievable, just unbelievable. The words she has, the way she could interpret their work, praise the students. And I wish everybody had the opportunity just to listen to her talk about the work. The students must have been blown away because they were really well honored. And the best of the show was Keaton Hudson from San Marcos. So congratulations to Keaton. It was a great art display. It was well worth it. And then I have to compliment the students who are raising funds for Haiti, led by Peabody, who gave a challenge to everybody else. So we'll know maybe later how much they raised, but they're doing a great job. Okay. Any other? Okay. Mr. Cordero?
I'm sorry, I just want one more quick announcement, not specifically related to our school district, but in the educational field. I think probably many people are aware Dr. Luis Leal, who has been who's 102 and is a professor emeritus out at UCSB, passed away yesterday. A tremendous loss to the Santa Barbara community. He's been honored. He was honored by President Clinton. He has received numerous national awards and recognition, and so just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge his passing because it's a tremendous loss to Santa Barbara community.
Thank you. Okay, item C3, announcement of closed session action. Item B2, the board unanimously voted to deny the appeal of a denial of an interdistrict transfer. And again, it was 5-0. Item B3, a closed session was held by the governing board on January 26, 2010 to discuss the possible release of an administrative employee. In accordance with the Education Code Section 44951 and 44929.21, the governing board, by a vote of 5-0, determined that the said employee will be released from his or her position for the 2010-2011 school year and authorized the superintendent to send a notice to the employee informing the employee of the board's decision. That was item B3. Public comments, C4.
We have two members of the public who have requested to speak under this item. Kate Smith, I believe this is yours, correct? You'll have to read the name. Oh, all right. A-I-E, the person. Followed by Michael, is it Yee? Okay.
President Herron, members of the Santa Barbara School District Board of Education, I am the person. When joined by others, I becomes we, the people. And when we, the people, embrace an idea whose time has come, there is nothing more powerful in human form. These words are bolted to this administration's building wall. And there came a time of great meetings and conferencing, and every day brought a new group to see and a new place to meet. On his way to the morning's appointment, the children ran up to him and begged him to go for a walk. The advisors rebuked them, knowing his busy schedule. "Leave the children alone," he said, "and let us go for our walk. For are not these little ones the reason that we are here? We must never lose sight of that." This school district has lost sight of the educational mission. At the beginning of this meeting, we heard a group of junior high school students play musical instruments. And one of the board members stated that it was because of a parcel tax, that they were there. I am so disgusted at the lack of educational knowledge. All of our public monies are spent on self-aggrandizement. You refuse to listen to your constituents, and you enjoy a sense of invulnerable status. We, the people, are rising to expose school
30 seconds.
and government corruption.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith.
Michael Yee. You will have 3 minutes.
Hi, I'm here to represent the Santa Barbara Youth Council, and I just wanted to say that we're interested in the decisions made for the schools that we go to. And I'll be here hopefully at every meeting. And yeah, that's it.
Well, welcome. We look forward to it. If we can help you in any way, let us know. Make sure you get the agendas well in advance on the website.
Thank you, Mr. Yee. For public comment? Yes. Okay. Okay. Judy Esquivel.
I guess more than a comment, it is a question about McKinley School and when the problem with the drainage system will be fixed. We were told it would be done over the break, and it hasn't been resolved. So as a concerned parent, my son who attends McKinley School, I would like some information about when the problem is going to be resolved.
I don't know if Mr. Hutyunk wants to make a short comment, but
Yeah.
I'm sure he'd meet with you afterwards or talk to you in person.
Okay.
Does the board need more information on it? Is that?
I'm sure we're going to
If
get
the-
that.
If the board would like information, we'd be happy to comment on it.
Yes.
Sure. Mr. Hatyunk is our Director of Facilities.
Dr. Sarvis, members of the board, when we first discovered the problem at McKinley, which is a failed sewer line on the hillside behind it towards Ladera, we thought we'd be able to make a repair on that sewer line, and that's when we estimated that we'd be able to fix it, over Christmas break. That was not the case. As reported to you earlier, that line is unrepairable. We have to create a new line. It's about a $300,000 project, which you've previously approved. The contractor was supposed to mobilize tomorrow, Wednesday, on site with fencing. It'll be a 12-week project. It's basically replacing the whole sewer line and pumping it from what I call the south side of the campus near the City College to the north side between the main building and the portables, because that's where the city sewer is. There is no city sewer on the south side on the road between City College and the school. Otherwise, we'd tie in there and save a lot of money.
Okay.
It'll be a disturbance to the site as far as some parking, loss of already tight parking, and as far as fencing on campus, students will be,
Okay.
moved.
Is the school and the principal aware of the current status?
They are fully aware of the current status. We've held a meeting, Mr. Winiger and I, with the principal and his staff, about a half-hour meeting. They asked good questions. They're all aware of the scope, the timeline, and I'm surprised that the information didn't get to the parents.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hatyunk.
We'll make sure that it does.
Any more public comment? Okay. Thank you very much for coming. We appreciate the patience. Acceptance of donations, C5.
Move to approve with gratitude.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. D, the consent agenda, any to be withdrawn till later in the agenda? Dr. Noel?
I'd like to pull D7 and D9. And D16 is the consolidated application, the winter part 2. And, well, I'm prepared to, because of deadline, that we have to vote on it, I understand that. But the CONAP is the only occasion really when we get to have a pretty close look at how categorical monies arrive and how they're allocated. I just wonder if it's possible to have that as a regular agenda item or even a workshop. Because at least my notes on the CONAP are extensive. I just have at least a half dozen questions to ask.
We'll make a
So-
note of that on
okay.
future agenda items.
Okay, and I do have, Cynthia White can come if you want to talk about it tonight. I told her I'd text her if it was needed. So it's, whatever you would like to do tonight,
I have no problem.
but in the future.
Going ahead and approving.
Okay.
But as I say, there's a lot of, my questions, my approval is not contingent on the answers to questions.
Right.
That's
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. I do have to pull something
Yes.
from one of them. On D4, the student field trips, the very first field trip, Santa Barbara Junior High School, that is the Europe trip, that is being pulled. It's no longer going to be a school-sponsored event. It's going to be totally a parent event, and we'll take care of all of the, I don't know what you want to call it, firewalling or insurance, that it's strictly not tied to the school. I just talked to Principal Vecchio tonight.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Parker,
That was the one I was going to pull, so thank you.
any others? I'd like to pull D5, it'll be really quick. Okay. Do you have a motion for the balance?
Move to approve the remaining items on the consent agenda.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried unanimously. Under action items, section E, E1, the approval of naming of building and classrooms at the future Career Technical Education Building at Dos Pueblos High School.
Good. Dave Hatjunk, our Director of Facilities, will introduce this topic.
Thank you, Dr. Sarvis. I'm happy and pleased to be able to give you recommendations for 3 naming opportunities requested by the Dos Pueblos Engineering Academy Foundation. Mark Swanis, the principal, and Sandy Seal, the president of the foundation, are here with us tonight. And I'd like to turn the microphone over briefly to Sandy. We have 3 quick slides, and then we'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Hi, I just want to give you some really quick update and a quick background on the namings. This is where we are. As of today, we've broken $2 million, which is just great news. And you've heard about all of these. The very generous Dr. Ealings is giving us $1 million to name the building. Raytheon Corporate at the corporate level is giving us $175,000 as a capital donation, and the Tobes have given us $100,000. So, big progress. Okay, so 3 namings. The first one is the building itself. To recognize his generosity and the size of the donation, we are asking to name the building the Ealing Center for Engineering Education. The second one, which has actually been in the works for quite a while, we lost a student last year, a freshman. The family decided that donations in lieu of flowers should go to our capital campaign. And it was just an amazing response that we got. We had donations from $10 all the way up to $1,000. Everyone felt, the whole community, all the families, that something permanent needed to be done. Lindsay was working on a mechanical engineering project at the time, so the most appropriate thing was to name this classroom after her, the Rose Room. And the family has consented, and so now we're asking for your agreement. And then finally, Raytheon, as I said, we had executives come from their headquarters in Massachusetts to visit, and they're giving us this capital donation. They have been a supporter of the program since the very beginning. They've given us mentors, they give us money every year, all kinds of support and recognition. So when you add that all up, their donations are way over $250,000, and we would like to recognize that by naming the electrical engineering classroom the Raytheon Electrical Engineering Laboratory. Thank you. So any questions?
Questions or comments from the board? Mrs. Cordero?
I only have one question, because typically we see these and they seem like sort of wonderful opportunities and appropriate. I just wonder, has there been any objections to any of these?
No?
No, okay.
I don't know what an objection would be.
That's what I was wondering too, so I'm happy to hear that there were none.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of discussion with the Rose family about what they would want. And as I said, this seemed like the most appropriate thing to do. And, you know, they get a big plaque where they get to decide what goes on it.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Deacon.
I have to say, you certainly are on a roll, and it's wonderful to see. I particularly like the name of the Center for Engineering Education, because it really focuses on what's going on in this building. And yeah, that's nice too. And I remember the situation with Lindsay Rose, and I think it's wonderful that her family was able to get involved this way, and that the donations came. So I'm very much supportive of these opportunities, and I'd like other schools to look to this as a model too of ways that you can bring in additional funds for very important projects. So maybe it's early, but I'd like to go ahead and make a motion that we accept these naming opportunities for the Engineering Academy and all these different options that fall among.
Second.
Thank you.
Further discussion, Mrs. Parker?
Well, I'll just chime in. I think it's an amazing job that this foundation is doing in terms of pulling together the resources from the community. Highest accolades to you, and I think that these are terrific naming opportunities, so appropriate. And it looks like you have several more spaces that can be named. So we look forward to seeing some more coming forward, but I'm amazed, especially in the economy, the way it is right now, at how much progress you've made so quickly. So thank you for the tremendous work that you are doing, you and the foundation. I want to say it takes a village. Yes. Really. Yes.
Dr. Noel?
Yeah, I like the academic entrepreneurial spirit that has animated this project from the outset. And I just wish we knew how to find more of it and encourage it and see it blossom on our other campuses. And I'm not talking just about naming, but I'm going back to the creation of the project in the first place. And it's been really inspiring, and it's an inspired project.
If I can
Mr.
make one
Cordero?
quick-
I'm sorry. I just had a quick question because, Ms. Seal, you had submitted a speaker form, and I just wondered if the comments you earlier made were, okay, fine.
If I just make a comment and thank Sandy Seal for the information. I know the agenda item has my name on it, but most of that information was furnished by the Education Foundation. And if members of the public watching this wish to know more about any of these three individuals and their donations, if they'd read the agenda item, there's a little bit of information.
Okay. I'd like to thank the principal. These things don't happen without a strong principal. So, Mark, thank you very much. And for Raytheon, I'd like to personally thank Ed Ware, who's been involved in your program since day one, I believe. So I know that you ask, how do you get more involvement? You get more people like Ed Ware and principals like Mark Swanitz. So thank you very much. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passed unanimously. Thank you again very much. Item E2, adoption of resolution number 2009/10-30, encouraging school participation in the 2010 Census and School Week. Dr. Sarvis?
Barbara, would you like to come up to the podium to answer any questions? The upcoming 2010 census, the national census, is important to our community and it's important to our school district. We need to get the numbers right. We need to get people counted as they appropriately should be. Thanks to the suggestion of Mr. Herron, we have prepared a resolution that would commit the district to participate in the census and help us get the word out to students and to parents. Barbara Kiani and Mr. Herron have both attended some of the community events around, leading up to the census. And Barbara, why don't you describe the bags we just handed out?
Well, those are the materials that we picked up, Mr. Herron and I picked up and carried in. Regarding the census, we went to a meeting that was put on by the county. There's a lot of information that's going to be coming out to the community. The census forms. There are 10 questions on the form. They will be coming out using the Postal Service. I guess they're going to be delivering those to all households in March. The date to turn them in is April 1st. There are going to be groups such as Pueblo who are putting together opportunities for parents to come in, or basically community members to come in. There won't be any government officials there. The idea is to come in and help them with their forms to provide an accurate census. And this is so important because it's done every 10 years and is the basis for representation. It's also the basis for decisions that are made regarding financial apportionment, monies that come in from the federal government. It's important from emergency planning purposes as well, maps that are made, information as to staffing, all kinds of things. So we want to be supportive of this, and that's why the resolution has come forward. And there's materials, I left materials in the back corner for anybody in the public who wants to pick some things up. And so these bags that you saw were distributed to principals today so that hopefully we can provide that information to our school communities. We'll get the dialogue going and see what we can do to help.
I'd like to commend Barbara for attending the meeting, number one, and then watching her in action. They had all this material on tables, and she sort of stood back, and just at the proper moment, we moved in and took everything. It was watching her, yeah, and I'm sitting there, should we really take all of those bags? Or, and we cleaned them out on the premise that they wouldn't have to move them themselves.
Yeah.
And so it was a great job. If you think about it, every person registered is $3,000 to the state. If you think about that number, and if you look over a 10-year period of time, that's $30,000 per person registered. So it doesn't take a math genius to do some multiplication. If you miss 1,000 people, number one, it's a huge amount of money that the state, which we eventually get part of, and it's also the chance of losing one representative in the House of Representatives. And so it's a great civics lesson, and I'm hoping that the principals will take the opportunity in the next 3 months to formulate a class that's with California standards talking about civics, and that our students at least understand that there's nothing, understand the importance of it. And there were a lot of good comments made at these sessions that we'll get more of, but it's imperative that every single person gets registered and that people aren't afraid of the registration process. It's a simple 10-question item. They don't talk about income or anything like that. It's very simple. And so getting the word out to make sure that our underrepresented people get registered is very important.
Also, if you fill out your form, send it in, nobody will come to your house. So that's kind of nice. You want to make sure that you do that.
Yeah. So if you don't want anybody to come to your house,
Yeah.
fill out the form.
Yeah.
Yes. Any comments from anybody else? Okay. Do I have a motion?
I'll move to approve the resolution number 2009/10-30 of the Santa Barbara School District's encouraging participation in 2010 Census and Schools Week.
Second.
Discussion?
Oh, I would just like to thank Mr. Herron for the effort he's put into this because I think it's important and I appreciate what you've done.
Thank you. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. And the county will be the lead effort in this, and they're providing tons of material. E3, and I thank you for the approval of that. E3, approval of special education local plan area SELPA revisions.
Good. Tom Guajardo, our Executive Director of Special Education, will make this presentation.
Thank you. Good evening, members of the board, Superintendent Sarvis. On an annual basis, the SELPA asks that all school districts within the SELPA bring their updated JPA policies to the school board for approval. These are changed continually, and what the SELPA is trying to do is get back to a regular cycle of introducing them around this time of the year because in years past it has not been on a regular cycle. Once these are approved, they become special ed policies that we can utilize, and this is especially critical right now as we're going through a special education review, and our vision for our procedures manual is to be able to take the existing SELPA procedures manual and add more local information that is pertinent to our school districts. And so this evening we ask that you approve these, and I'll entertain questions.
Mrs. Deacon?
My question really was, what were the changes? Without knowing what was there previously, it was hard to know what was new.
You know, I tried for a few weeks now to track down. Apparently, the last full manual that was put together was in 2003. And it's gone through so many revisions, because what I was hoping to obtain is a strikeout of the previous one, or even a bold, so that we know what the new changes are. And I was not able to find that even at the SELPA. But if there's questions, I would be glad to go back and clarify those with the SELPA.
Dr. Noel?
One phrase on the first page, it says the SELPA document approved by the board is the district's policy document. Now, this surely is not exhaustive of the district's policies. Do we have something that integrates this with the district policy document?
Yes, I somewhat alluded to a little bit of that earlier. And what we want to do is take the SELPA, there's a SELPA local plan that is, I would compare it to like our board policies. And then there's a SELPA procedures manual, which I would compare to the administrative regulations. We want to take that, but we want to be able to add additional information that is more specific to our school district. And we've already started that.
Mm-hmm. Well, for example, the placement decision, this is on page 7-4, first paragraph, bottom line. The placement decision, this is about program and service options. Placement decision shall not be based upon the availability of services in the local plan area. I'd like to understand how that relates to placement decisions by the district, which is a subset of the local plan area. Are we consistent? Do we have a policy that is really consistent with this? And I assume we do.
Well, this does become our policy.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, but this refers to the local plan area, not the district. Local plan area includes North County and.
Right.
Yeah.
But.
Well, anyway, that, I mean, I understand. I mean, the principle I'm trying to ask about is exactly that. This becomes board policy, but it is not exhaustive of board policy. And there are some cases where the language, I would think, would have to be reconciled, just taking into account the differences in geographic area of the local planning area and the district and of our district.
This is by no means
by way of a question.
This is by no means exhaustive, and we will make it more specific, and we've started to update our own policies that we want to make sure that are integrated with the SELPA procedures manual. On that statement, Dr. Noel, that the sentence that you're referencing, what that alludes to is that if we have a student who requires a certain placement, and we look to neighboring districts for support in terms of that placement and cannot find an appropriate placement, then we are able to look outside for non-public schools, for example, and in which case we would have to access the SELPA to obtain those services.
Yeah, I understand that. And a lot of that's listed in more detail. Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Here on page 9-5, budget planning process, review of annual budget plan for the subsequent year. Now, this is SELPA's business, and it's a matter of the Joint Powers Authorities Board. But it directly affects us. Do we have? I just made a little note here. I'd sure like to regularly see a copy of that. That would come to us, and just because we are so integral to this. They control our money, right?
Yes.
They're the ones that their allocation formula is what determines how much we get of the federal money that comes through the state. Okay, that was another thought.
They do, Dr. Noel. Keep in mind that we also have a Fiscal Committee of which Meg Jate is a member, and we do have approximately every other SELPA meeting is a joint meeting with the program people like the directors and Meg Jate, and there's recommendations that are made, and then ultimately they'll go to the JPA comprised of various board members and the superintendents in the county.
And, okay, Mrs. Parker?
Well, I just want, the SELPA is sort of, for a long time, while I was on the board, the SELPA was kind of like an acronym that you heard used a lot, and it didn't get up close and personal, and maybe it shouldn't, but more familiarity with SELPA processes, and I think I was on the board 3 or 4 years before I understood that they control our money, and how that works, and I think one time Fred Rifkin and I we had very bad relations with our SELPA for some time. Some parents were very unhappy, and I know he and I we looked at this as though we got, because we had to sign it, we had a chance to amend it, and apparently it offended deeply the people at the Joint Powers Authority, and we didn't mean to do that. Just we took it literally that, hey, it's here for us to approve. This time I'm not proposing any amendments.
Well, let me comment on that. If we saw language that we objected to, we really do need to approve this, then go to the SELPA and propose any changes, because this has now hit all 26 school districts in the SELPA, all 26 school districts in the county, for all of their approval.
And they're all saying, we have to approve it because they all approve it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mrs. Parker?
In looking at the layout of this, it looks like we are only approving the revisions. So when I look through these numbers, I see that, there's 1-16, 1-17. Presumably there's one from page 1 to 15 that we don't see here. Numbers up, maybe there's a section 2 and a section 3 that we're not seeing here at all. Does the SELPA post the entire policy document on their website? Is it available for people to look at to see how these revisions will fit into the whole?
Yes, it is. The SELPA plan and the SELPA procedures manual are both on the SELPA website.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have your...
And I guess we last approved it, and the parts that we're not seeing tonight are still approved.
And do we have your assurance that we're taking a very active role in the SELPA process and attending their meetings and understanding what's going on? And we have 2 active citizens that are also involved with SELPA?
Yes, absolutely. As a matter of fact, the directors and I met last week, and we had a SELPA meeting last Friday, and all 3 of us attended. Meg Jate was there for the fiscal portion of it and attends all the meetings. And so, yes, we are very well represented there with 4 people.
Okay, good. Because that hasn't been always the case, evidently.
I know.
So thank you.
You're welcome.
Do I have a motion?
I move to approve the amendments to the SELPA plan, the revisions to the SELPA plan.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passed unanimously.
Thank you.
E4, approval of job description for Executive Director, Human Resources. Dr. Sarvis.
The retirement of Chris Robertson, our Director of Personnel Services, leaves a need for leadership in the personnel office and specifically in human resources. We've been engaged in a little reorganization. We're moving payroll over closer to personnel. There are some things that we think need to be done. In the absence of having a director, the responsibilities for the position are currently being shared by a number of us. In previous studies of other districts our size typically have an assistant superintendent responsible for human resources. We have a job description that we would like you to approve in front of you that has a designation as Executive Director, Human Resources. We would like to advertise for this position this spring. It's a critical time to get the right person, and we do not think we can fail in that process. We do not want to fail in that process. We think it's very important to be successful. This position, as compared to the director position, has more responsibilities, higher level responsibilities. It carries a salary level that's a little bit higher. It's about $7,500 higher, I believe. Overall, this would mean an increase of $8,900 in salary plus benefits. However, since we will not replace the position for a good 6-month period, even given the fact that we are paying for some time from Dr. Robertson, we would still gain some $62,000 in the current year budget between now and the end of June. So we're asking you to approve this job description.
Mrs. Parker?
Well, 2 things. One is that because we never saw a previous description for the Director of Personnel, I don't know what added responsibilities there are to make it worth an increase in salary. So I don't know if you can talk a little bit about that. And then the other thing I noticed is this is the Executive Director of Human Resources, and it's referred to as the Human Resource Department. So is that a change from Director of Personnel?
That would be a change. In fact, we borrowed heavily from other districts that do have executive directors. Those other districts, I believe I've listed, Chico, Capistrano, New Haven, Unified, Orange. Oh boy. There are a couple of very specific areas like BITSA and PAR that had not been under the Director of Personnel before.
And actually, there's a number of, as you go through the job description, it talks about integration with the payroll function. And what we're trying to move toward is a human resources department where personnel and payroll were integrated, because there's a lot of interdependencies between those departments. I like to think of personnel as the intake valve, and then whatever's taken in there ultimately comes out in payroll. And so unless those processes are tight and clean, then we have problems down the line. So as you look through the job description, there's a bunch of references to payroll and how payroll communicates with budget and also with personnel. And that's the whole idea of having an integrated human relations department, and that's different from the previous job descriptions.
Mrs. Cordero?
I'm sorry, I just wondered, so you said that's different from the previous job description. So in the past, when Dr. Robertson was in that position, what relationship with payroll did she have?
None. And one of the things you'll see that's different here organizationally is this position would report to me as opposed to Dr. Sarvis. And actually, when there have been glitches either in personnel or in payroll, and since they're interdependent systems, you can't fix one without fixing the other, and that's really the whole approach here.
Dr. Noel?
Same spirit. I'm looking on the back of page 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bullet points down. Maintain and monitor position control program for district authorized positions.
Yes.
And I just, having learned so well from you, Mr. Smith, about separation of functions, I wrote on here, separation of functions, question mark.
Yes, well, remember position control is actually it's a two-sided equation. You've got the chairs, which basically have budget and budget codes assigned to them, which is what budget and position control in the truest fashion do. And then the other side is you attach people to sit in those chairs. And personnel actually does do that portion right now. When we hire somebody to sit in a chair, they attach that actual person with a face and put in all their information to the position. So there's still a segregation of duties, and the internal controls are in place, but that's probably a reference to that.
Okay.
Mrs. Deacon?
In the absence of a head of human resources, who will actually be running the search, and what are our plans in terms of the vetting process, and who's going to be doing that?
Well, we will jointly. I'll spearhead that. I will designate the need to post it in JIS. We'll run it for a fairly long period of time. I'll work primarily with Ann Peak in that process. We will advertise it thoroughly. I'll decide on the timeline for it. We'll designate a number of people, and we'll ask some of you to serve on the interview committee. Probably the three of us will all participate in the paper screening, so that we're looking, again, blindly at the candidates without seeing the name or without seeing the other comments about the candidates, so that we pick the best candidates to invite to interviews. We'll be looking at the interview questions. We'll be doing that jointly, but I'll spearhead that process.
They're the equivalent of something like CASBO for human resources for schools, so we could help put the word out through them as well.
Very good. Thank you.
I just have one concern. you know, we've never had an executive director until we hired executive director of special education. Are we going toward the trend to now have another level of executive directors, and as a director resigns, we hire an executive director for that position? And where we now have a lot of directors, are we heading toward the situation where we'll have all executive directors?
No.
Okay, I'll tape that. And Dr. Noel?
Yeah, I had a couple other questions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bullet point on the front page. Talks about direct planning, development, and implementation of personnel orientation, staff development, and in-service training. And my question was whether a human resource director is really the person to direct the planning of in-services for teachers, if that's what this means, and whether that is really requires a more substantive background.
Yeah, this is really more of a shared function. What I want to make sure happens is that we do have trainings planned, and the trainings for teachers are really very well accomplished, I believe, by the educational division and by curriculum, where we have a lot of designated trainings. I'm more concerned about the trainings in other areas of responsibility.
This is not about content. This is about making it happen.
Yes.
I believe it speaks somewhat to PAR and BITSA, and you notice that it talks about planning, where is it? Development and implementation of personnel orientation. I think it's more about being a part of the district and the beginning stages of employment here.
But notice that this also designates that that's in conjunction with other departments and with sites, because a lot of the trainings get defined at the site level as well.
Yeah. Last question. Serve as chief negotiator for the district in contract negotiations with bargaining teams representing labor unions. The question comes up from time to time is who is best suited structurally to do the negotiations. And my concern has always been, because I years ago read a lot of research on bargaining and things like that, and they said, and the concept of having an agent between the people who are going to make decisions and the others, so that you have one step removed, was a very attractive one. I think we've had this discussion some years ago, and I wanted to raise it again, whether we want in the job description to have that prescribed, or whether to leave that up to your discretion, really, and with the board's involvement.
Well, we would expect this person to be our primary negotiator. We would expect them to organize that process, keep it moving forward. However, we've evolved something of a team that we haven't had before, and that's primarily thanks to the additional input and participation of our associate superintendent and deputy superintendents. So it's a much stronger team in that respect.
Well, I just, I hate to see it prescribed in a job description, quite where, like just maybe the first word, the serve. It's really to be qualified to do that, but it seems to me it would be prudent to leave some flexibility there for you to adjust to circumstances.
If we believed, for example, that the deputy superintendent would be a better chief negotiator, primary negotiator, we could make that change even if we had this job description in place.
We do have to approve that appointment, don't we?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we do.
So you do have.
But as we advertise, I want to make it clear that we're looking for a person who could serve as the chief negotiator. And I think that's a very important.
See, but this is called major duties and responsibilities. I would simply then move it over to qualifications and/or experience.
We could do that.
Yeah. I've just heard conversations where you get kind of nailed to the job description.
Do you want to make a motion, Dr. Noel?
Well, let me suggest that instead of serve as, that we simply insert a couple words like able to serve as, or something like that.
Fine.
Do you want to make that motion, Dr. Noel?
Yes, I move to adopt it with the amendment that on that item, which is 4 bullet points from the bottom on the front page, it says able to serve as.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second?
Further discussion? Mrs. Cordero?
I'm wondering what duties have that the previous director performed have been removed from this list?
I don't recall removing any. In fact, we really started from scratch with this list. We looked at what other districts were doing. We combined what we thought were appropriate roles, and if we went back to the previous list, I don't think you'd find any that have been actually removed. Many of them are stated in a very different way.
My concern is, as we have found in various audits and and as was mentioned earlier, we often have been told that we are understaffed in various areas, and because we have nobody to perform certain duties. And I think the intent of this was to help bridge that by identifying the, or giving the executive director some of those duties. But my concern is it's still just one person with a finite amount of time.
That's right.
And Dr. Robertson wasn't sitting around twiddling her thumbs. She was filling up her time with the duties that she had. So by putting them on paper doesn't create any more ability on the part of one individual to actually be able to oversee all of that. So that was the idea behind the question of, have we taken anything out of the job, shifted it somewhere else to allow the person the ability to accomplish these new responsibilities?
Well, I think I could answer that in 2 ways. I mean, some of the issues or some of the items included in the job description just on the natural fall into my area. So I'm not expecting that this person would do all these things, exclusively by themselves. I also think that the new organizational structure with proximity to my office, there's a streamlining inherent. I mean, the superintendent in any district is not going to be as accessible as I probably am going to be, because the demands on his time relative to community demands and things like that are greater. So I think both of those things should result in more effective time management. And frankly, I'm hoping we get somebody with great organizational skills as well.
So do you feel fairly confident that one, human being without hours could accomplish this job description?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And we would still expect this person to delegate. I mean, we still have a department with a number of people in that department, and many of those are very capable people.
Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried unanimously. E5.
Thank you.
Approval of written instrument for evaluation of...
I apologize. This is E2. The item we were on was E4. Is that you wanted to speak to that?
Yes.
Okay.
President Herron, members of the Santa Barbara School Board, this item is an example of administrative self-aggrandizement. Ms. Cordero stated the board has been told that the district is understaffed. You could hire 100.
Can you start the clock, Mr. Smith?
You could hire 100 people and still not be any closer to competence. Please consider spending some of our public money to fix the sewer system at McKinley or fund the arts. Dr. Noel, you mentioned your lack of understanding of the SELPA. I was your volunteer Santa Barbara School District parent representative to the SELPA CAC. I attended every Joint Powers Agency meeting for years. I came to this podium dozens of times to expose Bill Cerrone's Machiavellian mechanisms and the infamous Marcia McClish and Sharon Watt. Please listen to the people, to parents, to advocates, to educators, and activists, and do not fund this position. You are throwing our public money down a very deep, dark, destructive black hole. Dr. Noel, after the special education scandal of hiring Jacob Jensen, whose salary was increased because Brian Sarvis said you couldn't find any competent hirees, you came to this podium and you read an article from the Santa Barbara News Press that you had submitted. The title was, "It's Time, Dr. Sarvis." There was a crisis of confidence, and you suggested that Dr. Sarvis resign. I am suggesting that we are at that same point now.
We're
Do
talking
not-
about a job description for an executive director.
Right. I am telling you, if you continue to self-aggrandize, if you continue to increase the administrative budget rather than spending the money to educate our children, rather than any self-scrutiny, without any understanding of educational curriculum,
30 seconds.
methodology, or assessment, I suggest that what I said at the beginning of this meeting in public comments, that you have lost sight of the educational mission. I believe that my point is well proven.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith. Okay. E5, approval of written instrument for evaluation of superintendent. Got my name on it, so let me start. In the memorandum that accompanies this, there's a couple date changes. It was written on the assumption that we were having a meeting possibly on the 19th. The reality is that meeting is not being held, and so instead of February 19th, it should say February 23rd, and instead of February 23rd, it should say the first meeting in March. Attached to this memorandum is the job description, or the evaluation of the superintendent that was used the last 2 years. And in a meeting at the end of last year, it was in the minutes that we will have this in front of us to determine whether we want to use the same one for the third year, or if you have any changes, or if you want something totally different. I'm presenting this on the basis of it's been the one that we've used for 2 years, and there's logic to say use it for a third year so you can get comparisons. But it's wide open, and so this agenda item is purely on, do we want to approve this evaluation instrument along with the sort of calendar that I've presented. Dr. Noel?
Yes, in some sense, it's a little awkward to be talking about changing this now because it's been in effect for this past year, and the superintendent has had this to look at, knowing that he will be evaluated by something like this. Well, like if we're going to revise it, it ought to be like for the subsequent year. In which case, then I would like to talk about some revisions, but maybe it's, for example, on the annual goals, I would like to see some. I think we're at a point where we can talk about numeric, measurable change. You know, maybe probably never this simple, but something like an across-the-board 5% increment, however measured, 3%, whatever the amount, but just to move towards measurable change. But I don't think it would be appropriate to do that now. I think we can tweak this, but I think the introducing new criteria at this point would not be fair.
Mrs. Cordero?
Well, I agree, and I think given that since we hadn't had any further discussion about this instrument, I was sort of operating on the assumption that this is probably what we were going to be using, as well as I agree with Dr. Noel that Dr. Sarvis was most likely operating under that assumption. So I agree that I would kind of like to see us just, sort of accept this instrument for this year, and then maybe establish a subcommittee, or we could even just have a workshop where to develop any changes or work on any changes that we might want to adopt for next year. But I wouldn't want to spend a lot of time tonight looking at changes that we're probably not going to make for this year, but rather, be a little bit more, spend a little bit more time on it for next year.
The one other change I think that is encompassed in this memo is that, again, I haven't been involved in this process before, but I've been, and again, this sort of process has been developed by Mrs. Cordero and myself, meeting with Dr. Sarvis. And I was sort of informed that part of the first meeting, the board members did the tally of all the results. And my suggestion is that rather than take the board's time to do that mechanical, that you assign myself and one other member to take the confidential results, do the calculations so that when we meet, the calculations are done and we don't spend a lot of time each one trying to do, divide by, or multiply or add and then divide by 5.
Yay, thank you.
Yeah,
It
so-
does sound wonderful.
Yeah. So
glad-
part of
glad
this
you
would-
volunteered.
What's that? So one of the, part of this also is to name another member of the board to join me. And it doesn't have to be me, it could be any 2 members, so I'm not gonna say it has to be me. Any 2 members who want it, I volunteered because I thought it'd be easier to find one more. So, any further discussion?
I'm willing to volunteer, but I'm also willing to have somebody else do it if, were you going to volunteer? Oh, okay.
Mrs. Deacon?
Well, just on that comment, I think it would be better to have someone who'd participated in previous evaluations do it, so I don't know if Mrs. Parker would.
No,
or Mr.
yeah, I
Dr.
think
Noel
that
would like
it's
to.
fine if, I think it'd be great if Mrs. Cordero, as the president and vice president, worked on it, get you ready to do it again next year. So I think that's a terrific idea. I agree with Dr. Noel's comments about revising for 10-11. Maybe when we're looking at our 10-11 focus goals, that might be a time to do that. I don't know when that meeting's happening, since we're just about to look at 09-10 again. But I think that would be good. So I'd like to go ahead and move to approve the existing evaluation instrument.
We do have public comment.
May I suggest that you also include in that motion replacing the annual goals, which are our old annual goals, with the current board focus goals?
Let's have public comment and then.
You mean in 10-11 or?
No.
No, the
For
ones
now,
we're,
'cause
u-
it
ones
just
we're
doesn't get
operating under
updated.
right now.
It didn't get
Oh,
updated.
right.
Okay. Lane Wheeler? And
Thank you, Lane Wheeler, President of the Santa Barbara Teachers Association. Obviously, the job of superintendent is a vast one and filled with many, many areas that need to be evaluated. Couple of questions I'd put forward to the board. In the annual goals, while I see under staff recruitment and retention some very worthy goals, I don't see anything that really articulates the collective effort to really engage and entertain the 2 labor unions that work with the association, with the district. The other piece that I see that is not very clearly articulated in here is any direction in here as the dissemination of the report. We're always concerned with it in education about how well we're doing, and while this is certainly a worthy evaluation, it really doesn't identify how this report will be disseminated for public consumption. So it may be something that would be worth addressing formally before you consider a full adoption of this. Dr. Sarvis has done an admirable job in working with the unions, and this is not a complaint. It's just simply, I believe, something that might need to be included as a public articulation of this document. So thank you very much.
Mrs. Parker?
Thank you, Mr. Wheeler, for bringing forth that point about labor and relations in terms of the staff recruitment and retention. That's certainly an area that we could look at as we look at revising it. I do think, though, however, evaluations are confidential personnel documents, just like they are for teachers, and so that is not something that would ever be made public. I would like to amend my motion to include the points that Dr. Sarvis raised about making sure we have the updated focus goals in here as we intended.
The second accepts the amendment.
Mrs. Deacon?
I have, I think, what might be also an amendment, and it's under revenue enhancement. The commentary here reflects the need to look at diverse revenue sources like increased student attendance. In the last year, we certainly have looked at alternative ways of enhancing revenue that didn't have to do with more students. So I don't know if we want to change this to reflect what happened this last year.
Well, I think the motion is for Dr. Sarvis to redo this entire annual goal section to
Okay.
make it
So that'll be
make it pertinent to what's going on
I just
now.
wanted to point out that one piece
Yeah.
of the annual goals. Thank you.
Mrs. Cordero?
But I just want to point out also that what is listed there is the board focus goals and annual goals that we have already identified. So we're not revising that at this point. We're just putting the ones that we have already adopted in here because these reflect the old ones.
The other comment is that it's also my understanding from previous that part of this process possibly might be some type of, Ms. Goodell, help me out, written evaluation. What was the term you used?
That we thought we might add a narrative component. We had talked about that at the end of our last cycle of giving the superintendent a bit of narrative feedback in terms of, rather than just the numerical feedback, in terms of some of these focus goals, et cetera. So we thought that that would be something that we might want to talk about adding as we review the evaluation.
Mrs. Parker?
Well, just that I appreciate that because we've done it orally in the past, but in fact his contract calls for a narrative, and that has not been happening the way it should be happening to pull things together. That's going to be hard work, but I appreciate that that's the direction.
Yeah, so as you fill out the form, be thinking in terms of, okay, how can we verbalize this in written communication, Susan? Mrs. Deacon, you could help us on that.
Sure.
Mrs. Deacon?
Well, my question would be then, under the comment section at the very end, if each board member provided comments, that could then be consolidated into one narrative. And people could write those comments with that in mind.
And part of our evaluation will be to arrive at a consensus of a narrative.
Along with consideration of the numerical scoring. Okay.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried unanimously. Thank you very much. E6, second reading and adoption of board policies and administrative regulations, 4000 series.
Elaine Alvarado, our coordinator of personnel for classified services, is here with us tonight to lead us through this. Barbara Chiani is here, who has also worked a lot on this. As you may recall, when we went through this in the first reading, there were not that many changes. And when we get to, well, one of the items, I would like to comment as we get to that item. Elaine?
Yes, and Dr. Sarvis, thank you. Do you want to refer to, let me see here, down to F6. And Dr. Sarvis, was that, did you want to discuss the pulling of that agenda item? Or I can go over that if you like.
Yeah, when we get to item F6, I think we've notified the board that we'll be pulling that item.
Okay.
We don't need that item. In fact, you already see that item in here.
Right, yeah, it was a duplicate. Thank you, Dr. Sarvis, board members. As you know, we presented to you, the board, on September 29th and October 13th, the first readings of the 4000 series, the board policies and a review of the administrative regulations. You have provided much of the input, edits, recommendations, inquiries on many of these policies. Again, thank you to Barbara for going through those and going through the DVDs and getting all the information and details that you had requested. And she has provided you in the packet the areas that you had needed clarification or more information on that we followed through, and a lot of her work and following through on that with either legal or through the California School Boards Association on that. So that is in your packet. We can go over that if you choose to. As you know, we pretty much have had to revise and update the total 4,000 series for the most part. It had been quite a while and many years. So what you see before you is the bulk of it. And obviously we're going to have to continue to do updates. We've already been notified by CSBA that will be those are soon to come around, and so we'll be making these revisions and bringing them back to you for approval and adoption. So at this time, just along with any questions, inquiries, clarifications, we're requesting that the board adopt the presented Personnel Series 4000 Board Policy and Administrative Regulation, and along with any recommendations that made by Dr. Sarvis as well.
I noticed that in the questions and answers that you've provided, all of the changes that are included in there, either changes or no changes, are in the actual documents that follow. So
correct.
Everyone should be aware that what is discussed in the cover letter, those they either have or have not been done based upon the item, and they're included in the document. I'm curious, do we have any public comment? No. Just to sort of figure out how to do this, can you tell me how many sort of changes or pages you've doctored so I know where we're going on this, Mrs. Parker?
Well, for me, I only have the one that I know that Dr. Sarvis is planning to pull. So.
Okay. Susan? Just one? Dr. Noel? How many pages do you have marked that you want to talk about?
Well, I'm dwindling them down from a dozen to 3, maybe 4.
Okay. And Mrs. Cadero? One. Okay, and I have 1 or 2. So, well, I'd like to do this. I'd like to just start with Mrs. Parker, and well, you say yours you think is taken care of.
Well, in the sense that, why don't we go ahead and have Dr.
Should we
Sarvis
jump
pull
to that?
that one?
Yes.
If you'd like to look at page 270, how about that? That's making a lot of progress very quickly, isn't it?
Yeah.
270 is post-retirement employee benefits. It's an exhibit 4317.14. This exhibit is the current policy. Oh, hold it. Am I in the wrong place?
I think you're in the wrong place.
I'm
Slightly the
sorry.
wrong place.
I am sorry. Let me find it.
I think you want,
4351, I think is where we.
4351.
4362?
No, sorry, it's page 282, 4354.1.
4354.1, yes. So we're moving even further ahead. If you'll go to page 282, this is the administrative regulation 4354.1. It is management and confidential retiree benefits. This is the current policy. We've been operating under this policy for quite some time. We've been looking at this policy. We believe the liability to the district is entirely too much. I believe the assessment in the analysis was something like $8 million in future liability to the district for everybody, yes. And that's if we didn't apply it to any new employees, if we just drew a line and applied it to existing employees only. So we've been working on revising this. We haven't gotten far enough along on this to bring you back a new policy. I'd like to simply pull this page and bring this back to you at a later point in time.
Okay. And I thought you were also going to talk about AR, well, page 290 and 291. Vacation days.
And that may be affected as well. Let me do the same thing with page 290, AR 4362, which is vacation and holidays for management and confidential personnel, and bring that back to you as well.
Okay, good. Dr. Noel?
these statements? I think
Just-
we've gotten into trouble because there's too much detail.
Yeah, I think that's part of the part of the evaluation that Dr. Sarvis and staff will come back to us with. Dr. Noel, you have 3 or 4 pages. Can you give us a page number?
Page 63, very small point. It says no certified employee, this very point and 3. And 4, no certified employee shall agree. So my question was, why only certified?
Certificated?
Certificated?
The only one who.
Well, this is a
certificate.
This is a certificated policy. Elaine, do you want to?
Sure, I'm sorry, I just wanted to read
Is everybody
that.
in the hierarchy certificated? If so, then I
Well,
have no problem.
I need to explain the references here. You're on page 63, right?
Yes.
The board policy 4112.61, the 4100 policy is certificated. The next one down, 4212.61, is for classified. The next one down is for management and confidential employees, the 4300 series. Do you want to explain that?
So what, again, what Dr. Sarvis is just explaining, it is relevant, in general, the statement to classified, certificated, and management. And this board policy, again, taken from CSBA, is very generic in that statement, and then it just goes into a specific statement as far as a certificated employee. No certificated employee shall write or sign a letter of memorandum which intentionally omits. And on that, has to do with their credential, has to do with their licensing, and it reflects that area, and that's what that reference is.
That's not my question.
Yeah.
I mean, I have the person about whom the letters are going to be written, okay? And I understand those are certificated. Then I have the person who is writing the letters, and I'm simply saying, why would you restrict the author to certificated? Why not just, well, any employee, it would read, no employee shall write, no employee shall agree.
I believe that is the intention here. Barbara, is that how
I was going to say, yeah, this.
is that how Kitty advised us, though?
Correct.
I mean, are we then passing a policy for all levels? Then we should remove any reference to certificated? Is that correct?
We'll check. Again, these are consistent with CASBA language and the board policy, so we've made no changes from the policy that they've presented to us, so we've
Well,
incorporated that.
And Barbara, you may want to explain this as well, but if my understanding of this is correct, then what we're looking at doing is passing a policy that would apply to all levels, certificated, classified, and management confidential. And I don't believe there should be any reference in the language specifically to certificated.
Well,
Yes.
And if there happened to be a non-certificated person about to write a letter, it would apply to that person.
Yes.
Mr. Herron?
Mrs. Parker?
Well, just in the reference in the third paragraph seems appropriate because it talks about their fitness to perform certificated services.
Yes.
But I do think that you could simply remove the certificated in the fourth paragraph so that no employee shall agree to provide a positive letter of recommendation.
Okay.
Barbara, is that consistent with what CSBA has
Well,
been advising?
we have used their template, but I'll go back and check, and again, we haven't altered it. So, but this is something that if there's what I can do is send you put something in the board brief after I double check this and make sure that there's no problem with us removing that. Is that all right?
If we remove it, it doesn't change the meaning because
No.
all is inclusive of certificated.
Yeah, I
Yes.
believe we should let the board go ahead. If we do have problems, either it's a technical revision, we can advise the board,
Okay.
or we would bring it back to the board and say, for this reason, we think we should operate in a different way.
Mrs. Cordero?
Well, I agree that it should be removed because I think the intent of the 4100, 4200, 4300 is that it will apply to everybody. But I also I think that in paragraph 3 that it should be removed there because it's talking about somebody who writes a letter for someone else who's going to perform certificated duties. So the person writing the letter might not be certificated. So I think we should just remove it from all of the paragraphs.
And we'll check in both and check with both paragraphs whether the certificated is
I'll do
needed.
that.
Dr.
Okay.
Noel? No, you have another item? Yeah, can you go on to your next item? Which page? What page?
Program participation. 153. It's about the peer review and assistance program. And it's in the middle of the page, program participation. Teachers may volunteer to participate in the program. That's all it's been. And the next part goes on, or may be referred as a result of an unsatisfactory rate. I'm proposing that may be changed to shall.
You're looking at Ed Code, though. That's the citation. I want to be very careful. It's an Ed Code citation on that paragraph, so I want to be very careful about any change to that language because we may be affecting.
I see the Ed Code section. What's the Ed Code say about it?
I will check on that.
Mr. Price, where's your?
Where's Mr. Price?
Let's assume the Ed Code says
Exactly
may.
that.
Okay, let's assume the Ed Code says may. Barbara will check on it, and if there's anything different, she can get back to us.
Okay.
Okay.
I just had a comment on page 166. I'm very pleased to see the elaboration of the provisions of the Ed Code on those issues about negotiations and sunshines. I have comments on 2 pages that are related, 188 and 287, and they have to do with sabbaticals. There's a reference to them in number 8 on the bottom of page 188, and a reference to them in the whole page of 287 is about sabbaticals. I have just wording, but let me just talk about the idea. The words fall into place with the idea. I think we should have a policy that announces the availability of sabbaticals and invites applications. The purpose being to make sure that there's equal opportunity to apply for sabbaticals. The way it has worked in the past is sort of fortuitous. They come. It's not part, no context, an application comes to the board to approve it. And I just have always felt, and I guess it comes from where I grew up at the university, where, yeah, I mean, sabbatical policy is there, you have to write a proposal and it has to be approved. And then everything falls into place in the sense of that it has to then contribute to the benefit of the district. You bring back some new skills, you write a report, knows what it's about.
Let me just comment. It says in here that it has to be done by January 15th, and it talks about it takes superintendent and board approval.
That's right, but there's no announcement telling faculty that the program is there. I mean, if they read this, they'll understand it. And maybe that's sufficient, but I've always been uncomfortable that I don't think that the very fact that it's got embedded in a policy, which already took me 2 hours to find in reviewing these things, I don't think that's essentially meaning what I consider to be the valuable criterion of giving equal opportunity to all the teachers to participate. That's simple.
May I comment? Go ahead.
Mr. Cordero?
I was just going to question whether, because I agree, I think that there should be some process by which teachers are all sort of made aware, or all certificated staff are made aware of what the process is and what the timeline is, et cetera. But I'm wondering, does that need to be in the policy, or can we approve these policies and this AR and then identify that as a procedure that we want to follow? Well, I'm wondering if we need to, I was thinking about that too, but I wonder if we need to add it in the AR, or if we could just adopt a procedure that then can be a little bit more flexible.
Okay. Now, a policy is the overarching sort of strategy. The administrative regulation are the nuts and bolts. We can certainly add to this existing policy, regulation, if you feel that adding that something to that effect about inviting, let's see, what was it? To invite teachers to apply for sabbaticals. That language could be added in there, and we could bring that back to you. So we can pull it for now and then just add the language.
Dr. Sarvis?
Here's my concern. I like the idea. I mean, if we have a program, then we should advertise the program. We have no money budgeted for this right now. We're in a tight budget. We're going to be looking for $6 million at our next regular meeting. And I do not want to advertise something that then I would recommend that you deny.
Well, can we just pull the sabbatical policy or suspend it temporarily?
Do we have a contractual? It's in the contract. So we do have a sabbatical policy in the contract. In fact, so we should not pull it at this point in time.
Right, yeah. I mean, I
Yes.
think that's fairly clear thinking. I mean, I think we should keep it in because it belongs in, but we shouldn't be advertising it because we're probably going to have to say no every time. And as someone who's been the recipient of a sabbatical, and I think they're great, and I would love to be able to offer them, but we know we don't have the money to do it right now.
Mrs. Parker?
I just want to point out that we're talking about sabbatical educational leaves for management and confidential, whereas for certificated, it falls under professional leaves, which is 4161.3. It doesn't have, quite as much detail. I mean, it's sort of a similar policy, but it doesn't have some of the date deadlines that the management one does. But I think that they need to stay in as is, and then it would be nice someday, there will be money someday, she said hopefully, and we can advertise it again.
Yes.
Thank you.
But I would be.
I agree.
I would feel it'd be very inappropriate to have, it would be very inappropriate, given this conversation, in 3 months from now, to have a single unitary sabbatical application come in that we're asked to approve, because it decontextualizes it totally. And I'm not saying you're going to do that.
Yes.
I don't think we can stop it, but I think
Well, there have been times in the past that sabbatical requests came in, and because of lack of funding, the district did not approve them, and that's a question. So should they be approved if it's an appropriate sabbatical request?
I think that's a board
I don't
decision.
know. We'd have to work with that.
At their own money, yeah. Sabbatical without pay.
I would like to return to the previous issue.
Yes.
We had, on the issue of PAR, we had an ed code reference, and the question was, given the language, teachers also may be referred pursuant to a collective bargaining agreement. We went to the ed code language. It said may be pursuant to a collective bargaining agreement. And our collective bargaining language, so, we're using the old-fashioned paper method here. It's only 3,800 pages here in the ed code, and the state administrative regulations are even longer than this.
What highly qualified, brilliant person found that so quickly?
What does our policy say?
Our contract says shall?
Our contract says shall. There's a section 4 about unsatisfactory performance, that if the unit member's performance is unsatisfactory, the immediate supervisor and unit member will meet to discuss, on and on. Such action shall include, but not limited to, the following. There are 6 of them, and one is peer assistance and review to assist the unit. So our collective bargaining says shall.
Given that language, we could change this from may to shall.
I'm sorry.
Which is, which is pursuant to our collective bargaining agreement.
Okay.
And as I mentioned, I think the last time, that the contracts do override some of the education code that you see before. So sometimes we're identifying education code just as it comes from that book. However, we have 2 contracts, bargaining unit group, that we have to adhere to as well, and that, in most cases, supersedes ed code.
Okay, anything more, Bob? Dr. Noel?
No.
Mrs. Deacon?
Mine was a clarification. and it's back in the notes at the very beginning, which aren't numbered, but it's on page 3 under administrative regulation, oath or affirmation.
Oh,
So in the middle of the page, after the number sign, there's a question and then an answer. So in the first answer, it says, legally employed non-citizens shall be exempt from taking this oath, and it cites Government Code 3101. And then in the next paragraph, the bottom line says, thus the district should require all employees to take the oath or affirmation required by Government Code 3100. Just in my simple reading of that, that seemed contradictory, but maybe you could clarify it, and I might have read it wrong.
This one came from Craig, and this came from CSBA.
So the first paragraph is our response from legal, from Mr. Price. And the second is, again, it comes from CSBA. And I believe we're just giving you both interpretations so that you can hear from where we stand on both. I think that we're trying to come to a middle ground, but we wanted to be able to give you the perspective from both groups.
And what did we put in 4112.3? Which, you say there's two options. Did you choose one of the two?
Let me just get to that real quick.
We didn't put anything. That was just a question that came up.
Oh, that was just a question?
That was
Okay.
raised. And so...
So, yeah, it remains, the language remains the same in 4112. Yeah, I just can't get to it. Wait, really, I can't get right to it.
It's on page 55.
Okay, thank you,
54 and 55.
Oh, God, that's way out.
54.
Okay.
So we did
Mrs.
not add
Cordero?
any language.
So we did not add any language, and we left it, the policy as is, as it was presented, and just provided information from the legal perspective, and then continued language and supporting language from CSBA.
So the question is still to us whether we require it or not. Is that right, then?
Well,
Because
to me,
when it says they are exempt, the other says they're not.
Well,
Mrs. Parker?
What I see is the CSBA giving a general statement and not talking about exceptions. But clearly, our legal counsel has said there may be exceptions. So I think that would just be on a case-by-case basis.
Well, I'm
Mrs.
wondering, I'm sorry, I didn't.
Go ahead.
Okay. I was wondering whether we're required to require it. Because there's a difference between what I think is the intent, which is saying that a person would defend and uphold the laws of the state, and saying that you support them. And what would happen? I mean, we're swearing an oath. If I were asked to do this again, I couldn't in good conscience say that I swear that I support the Constitution of the United States when the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of California of the state, when the Constitution of the state was recently amended to include what I perceive of as legalized discrimination. But I'm not going to, I would be willing to take an oath saying I'm not going to break any laws.
And remember, the oath of affirmation is that we're all mandated to be emergency preparedness and to be available in a case of an emergency, that we, as public employees, that we would be available to assist in any of that, those kinds of emergencies. That's one of the primary reasons for this oath of affirmation, is that when we become public employees, we are subject to being called upon by our superintendents and others to help out and assist. And that's one of the main focuses on this. And so we're upholding that government code in respect to that.
Well, my question was, are we free to, because I know that in the past there have been some institutions that have revised this to have sort of less of a political statement in it and just more of a generic, I'll abide by the laws.
And I do know what you're referring to, and in my 20 years here, I think I've only had 2 people that have approached me and have objected to the oath, and we didn't make them sign the oath, but just an acknowledgement and a written statement, either because of their religious beliefs or that they would be willing to help out in any kind of an emergency situation, and that was satisfactory to us as the employer. That wasn't going to prevent their employment. But that was done in a very informal manner. There wasn't a statement that we had them sign, a written statement. So it comes up, but not very often. And certainly due to religious objections, we would not mandate someone sign a piece of paper that they didn't have with religious beliefs. So I do know where you're coming from on that. And I think from the legal perspective that Craig Price has provided gives us that leeway, that option to exempt them from signing.
Right,
such an oath.
and that would be open to anybody who, for whatever reason,
correct,
didn't want to
correct,
or didn't feel comfortable.
Right.
Because I have always found it sort of uncomfortable that in the oath it says, I take this obligation freely, and yet it's basically by coercion, because we're telling them we can't do the job, you won't get hired if you don't do it.
And that's not necessarily the case.
Okay, okay.
So I would say that Craig Price's recommendation and language in there would be the more appropriate, but certainly would take your direction on that.
Mrs. Goodell? Yeah, do you have comments?
I just had one question. I'm not positive we can do this, but on page 21, when it talks about recruitment and selection, I was wondering if in the first paragraph, where it says the Board of Education desires to employ the most highly qualified and appropriate person available for each open position in order to improve student achievement and efficiency in district operations, and I was hoping we could add, and achieve a diverse workforce.
I just think that we need legal advice on that, if we can.
Yeah, because that's very similar to 2 responses that we did get regarding 4111.
Right.
You're
right.
We were trying to
Exactly.
change the information that we wanted to include, or was suggested might be included, potentially can run aground, make the policy, I mean, could put the district in a difficult position legally. So I think we need to take a look at those policies. 4111, again, the comments from legal. And
the reason, well, let me just explain my thinking behind that particular language, was that it doesn't specifically refer to demographics. It just uses a very general term, diverse, which could mean age, educational background, experiential background. There could be a variety of kinds of diversity. And so I thought that is very different than saying specifically reflects the demographics of a particular community.
Would the board like us to work with legal counsel to see if we can come up wording that might pass muster in the courts?
I would, but
I think you could try, but it specifically quotes Proposition 209 here, saying that
Yes.
you're not going to discriminate against or grant preferential treatment to any individual group on the basis of race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin, which covers a broad range of diversity.
But diverse doesn't just mean cultural or ethnic diversity.
But he calls out here sex, you know, I mean, there's other things besides ethnicity that are being
protected
cited here.
classes.
Would the board object to having Dr. Sarvis check to see if this language would be acceptable?
Can you give it to Dr. Sarvis in writing and then?
Yes,
Yeah,
I
okay.
will. Thank
And
you.
Is that the only one you had?
That was the only one
Okay, I just have,
You did see the language, though, that the board also desires a workforce that reflects the demographics of the district and student bodies?
Yes.
Okay.
on page 284, actually, I'm sorry, 286. On page 286, it talks about transportation. And we now have two executive directors of special ed and, you know, executive director of special ed, executive director human resources. I don't see those on the list. Would they fall in, should they be listed in there?
Yes, they should.
The reason that we did not make those edits because this was still part of the first reading that we presented back in October, and we were editing in fact, we had discussion on that very issue when we were putting this together. So according to our consultant with CASBA, that unless the board chooses to make those amendments tonight and adopt that, we had to bring forth what we had presented in our original presentation to you. So we did ask specifically that question when it came to these positions. Another option is to bring that back in another board meeting for action, just so that we could update that information and the title information. We can certainly do that if today the board.
If we have the legal power to do it, get it done.
Let's get it done.
You're right.
Yeah.
Right.
And the other one, it says coordinator of special education. Do we have such a position? Do we have a actually, do we do? Yeah, never mind. So, any other points?
Two directors.
It's here.
No, the director's there.
Well, we have
Second from the top.
we have
We just need
director,
executive.
and I believe we apply the same to executive director.
And that was the question that came up, is that if you wanted us to, in this, at this time, to update and make those edits and amendments, you know, with your recommendations, we could move forward. If you would go forward in adopting these policies tonight, or the ones that you've given us, then we could go ahead and make
Okay.
those changes per your recommendation.
So, as of now, if we had a motion to approve, it would be to approve, but delete AR 4354.1, delete AR 4362, make it shall instead of may on page 153. On page 63, take out the words certificated. And on page 286, add executive director, special education and human resources. I think that is just understood. If you want to add that too,
Yes.
to add a discussion about Mrs. Cadero's wording.
But we would go ahead and pass
yes.
pass the board policy, or is it the AR as it stands?
The BP.
BP, and then come back and add
Come
to
back.
that.
That would
Okay,
be-
okay.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor?
I'm sorry, we do have
Oh.
public comment.
Oh.
Lane Wheeler.
I'm sorry we're getting ahead of that, but Mr. Wheeler? Who was the second on? Dr. Noel, I believe. Dr. Noel, did you second that motion?
It was a tie between Cordero and Noel.
Oh, okay.
Dr. Noel can.
Dr. Noel.
Oh, we're both yielding, there'll be
Okay.
no second.
It's Dr. Noel.
I'll be very quick. There are a couple of the discussions that you had this evening that are covered already in our existing contract, particularly language on a unsatisfactory valuation for a certificated employee, and that specifically identifies that they shall be in the PAR program on the sabbatical. Once again, there's a number of stipulations that I believe address the conversations that you were having this evening. The only ones that I can see people being able to take right now is somebody who A, wins the lottery, or B, might find some sort of a collaborative situation where they are offered an honorarium that would meet or match their salary for the year. I don't know if Peggy Lim Chimko falls into that category, but she's about the only one that I can think of in the last 10 years or so that's been able to take advantage of a sabbatical of that nature. So once again, I would refer back to the contract to make sure that these comments that you are asking tonight do, in fact, coordinate with the contract. And there are a couple of other issues that I believe the association will bring forth to you regarding some of the policies. We only received the policy today in writing, so I haven't had a chance to really give a full look-see, but we will be back to you with that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll be happy to work with Mr. Wheeler. If they have concerns, we'll be happy to take those up, and in fact, we'll bring suggestions back to the board.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried unanimously. E7, approval of board action on student expulsion case numbers 09/10-12 and 09-10-19. The second one has been removed because it is supposed to be item number 20, not 19. So do I have a motion on 09/10-12?
Go ahead.
In case 0910-12, I move to approve the findings and recommendations of the administrative hearing panel.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried unanimously. We will now take a, no, we don't take a break yet. Conference agenda, F1, request to speak to Board of Education, complaints about Brian Sarvis and Michael Gonzalez, Mrs. Smith, and on your way up, well, Mrs. Smith, it's based upon the title. Well, and I have not consulted anybody on this, but my sense tells me I should read under Board Bylaw 9323, Section 6, there's a paragraph that says, whenever a member of the public initiates specific complaints or charges against an employee, the board president may inform the complainant that in order to protect the employee's right to adequate notice before hearing of such complaints and charges, and also to preserve the ability of the board to legally consider the complaints or charges in any subsequent evaluation of the employee, it is the policy of the board to hear such complaints or charges in closed session unless otherwise requested by the employee pursuant to Government Code 54957. However, it also says, in addition, the board may not prohibit public criticism of district employees. So you're perfectly in order to say what you want, but I just need to let you know that their employees do have legal rights and that your comments may affect them, per the board policy.
I'm sorry, President Herron, but what you just stated was non-compos mentis.
I'm sorry.
Did anybody else understand?
Can you get to the microphone and address the board, Mrs. Smith? Can you address the board, Mrs. Smith?
I'd like to remind you that we are under the Brown Act in this country.
I'm saying you are free to say anything you want according to our board policy, our board bylaws. I mean, the board shall not prohibit public criticism of its policies.
Excuse me, do not start my time yet.
No,
I have not addressed the board.
No,
He is
your time-
talking to me.
Your time is not started.
Thank
The board shall not prohibit public criticism of its policies, procedures, programs, services, acts, or omissions. In addition, the board may not prohibit public criticism of district employees. So you're free to say what you want to say. The next paragraph simply says you should be reminded that employees do have rights, and normally these things are done in closed session, unless the employees want them in public session. And the things you say may have a bearing on any subsequent evaluation of the employee. So I say it, you're free to say what you want and how you want to say it. I just felt compelled I needed to read that out of the board policies.
And in response, I'm compelled to tell you that our country is nothing more than rights and responsibilities. Point of personal privilege, please don't start the clock yet. I have not addressed the board president.
Yes, you have.
Point.
The clock has started.
President Herron, members of the Santa Barbara School Board,
point of personal privilege, I demand accommodation under Americans with Disabilities Act. I suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder from the attack by this school district on my family. I have permanent neurological damage from the medication Abilify. It's called tardive dyskinesia that makes it difficult for me to speak. If I become emotional, please give me a moment to compose myself. And if I speak slowly, it is due to my disability.
Thank you.
So I will ask for a little more time. In 1998, I submitted a compliance complaint to the California Department of Education. I prevailed on 6 counts. It was signed by Wally Olson. The most serious finding was child endangerment. Another finding was that the school district was caught fraudulently collecting state money for transporting my special needs daughter, when the fact is Gibraltar Road is dangerous and bus transportation is not an option. Lastly, California Department of Education concluded that there was not a viable complaint procedure and ordered the district to create one. Tonight, I am speaking to the fact that there is still no complaint procedure. There is no way to be heard. Truth comes as a conqueror only to those who have lost the art of welcoming it as a friend. Rabindranath Tagore. Because I have only a few minutes to speak, I would like to start speaking about Michael Gonzalez. He is incompetent. The gang task force, the outreach worker, the dress code, the school district boundary lines, the Williams Act, and compliance are under his purview. Your legal liabilities are substantial. Michael Gonzalez called me a liar several times. So I followed the complaint procedure and met with him, and I asked him, when did I lie? He replied that I lied at Star King when I said I owned a Spanish newspaper. Barry Capello will tell you my husband and I were co-owners of Las Noticias. For 17 years, my husband and I were part of the Ojai Valley Voice. Jeff San Marchi dropped dead a year and a half ago, so we published under a new name. The publication box states this paper is owned by Brian Smith, and then we gave the paper to the writers. Lastly, we published a paper about our long story and our battle, epic and landmark, with the Santa Barbara school districts. Bonnie Switek vandalized my husband's newspaper racks, and we hired a private investigator and a photographer to document this fact. Vandalism is an expellable offense for our children.
1 minute.
Yet Bonnie Switek was never accountable. Okay, I was given 5 minutes to speak on this topic. I tried to speak on the same topic a year ago after I was disqualified, but Brian changed the topic title to the board brief letter. Brian Sarvis abuses power. You lie, you cheat, and you steal.
Twenty seconds.
I did not speak that night, but I did submit my attachments. They were Dr. Noel's News Press article entitled, "It's Time, Dr. Sarvis. It's time to resign." I also submitted the attachment entitled The Retaliation Triangle. It was an article printed in a national publication called The Observer for Learning Disabilities Association, and it was printed next to an article about the retaliation in Santa Barbara against Kate Smith.
Mr. Smith, I'll give you 2 more minutes.
Oh, Thank you. Looking at this week's board brief letter, there is evidence of poop. Which brings up the fact that Brian Sarvis was videotaped saying bull poop. That was after Joan Esposito declared there is rampant retaliation in the school district, which is what Brian Sarvis tried to change this night's agenda topic to. Instead of complaints against Brian Sarvis and Michael Gonzalez, he stated that I would speak under the title Rampant Retaliation Against in the School District. Isn't that interesting that this week's board brief discusses a board policy or administrative regulations reference to staff retaliation? I think there's a problem in this school district. Also in the board brief, in addition to
30 seconds.
a proposal for executive director, a draft job description for another administrative position, there's a letter from California Department of Education, exemption of the requirement to pass the California high school exit examination as a condition of graduation from high school for eligible California Education Code, yada, yada. I'm sorry. There is a school-to-prison pipeline here, created by Bill Cerrone and his Machiavellian cronies, and
Thank you,
Thank you, Ms. Smith.
you're welcome.
Thank you. I'm going to suggest we take a 10-minute break at this point, and we'll come back and talk about F2. In fact, if there's no objection, Mr. Smith, I'm going to give you F5 to talk about first. I know, but I'm...
Mr. Heron, there are a number of people here for F2 that have been
Yes.
waiting.
Okay, after F2, we will do F6.
No, F.
We'll take F5. Yeah, F5. We'll do F5 after F2. And we'll be back in and Mrs. Parker, report on progress of outreach worker in suppression, prevention of gang violence, and evaluation of gang outreach worker.
We all set to go here?
Yep.
Excellent. Michael Gonzalez, who's our Director of Student Services and Compliance, will introduce this. We have a number of people in the audience with us on this agenda item.
Thank you very much. Good evening. A year ago, the board authorized the creation of a gang intervention program for the districts. What we are going to present to you this evening is a copy of the evaluation report conducted by Dr. Victor Dios from the Sociology Department at UCSB. When the board created this position, they also mandated that there be an evaluation component to the program. This report not only evaluates the gang intervention program for the district, it also provides you with a very current summary progress report of where we are. Without further ado, I'd like to present to you Dr. Victor Dios, who will make the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for having me here tonight. Earlier today, I was talking to my students at UCSB, and I was trying to have a conversation with them about a reading assignment I gave them, but they didn't do the reading. So I said, you know what, I look forward to tonight when I talk to the board and they actually read the report. So thank you for reading the report. You don't know how much it means to me, okay? All right, so how do you evaluate a program that's being both implemented, developed, and taking place at the same time? The outreach worker, Ismael Huerta, began his position in February of '09, and by March, we were evaluating his program. So that was a big question to try to answer. One of the things we could have done is, taking grade data, citizenship data, attendance data, and looked at it then and then looked at it now, and then I would come here and tell you, hey, we didn't find much change. right? But we wanted to make sure that we followed what the research in gang prevention, gang intervention in schools says, and that is if you really want to make change with this specific population, you have to develop specific approaches that work. And so one of the things we quickly began to see with the outreach worker was that he was developing a sort of an organic, from the ground up program based on the needs he saw the students have. And so what we named the program is this sort of motivational approach. Now the motivational approach is nothing new. It's actually been cited in the gang research over and over again. The motivational approach has to do with empowerment, self-esteem, teaching young people how to manage conflict, inspire them, and then raise their aspirations to become more productive citizens and do well in school. So here's one of the most prominent gang researchers in the country, Malcolm Gladwell, and he says, because gang members do not ordinarily respond well to standard agency walls, in this case schools, it is necessary to take the programs to the gangs. The primary change mechanism is the rapport established between worker and gang member. So the change mechanism here is the rapport, is the relationship. So how do you measure that relationship? Well, the way we wanted to measure the relationship that we thought most appropriate was to develop a survey that measured attachment to school, to community, to parents, and then, of course, get a sense of the students' perceptions of their relationship with the outreach worker over time. So this was our method. We conducted an outcome analysis, and the first thing we created was a survey. And this survey was based on scales already developed by other researchers. So it was already tested and had been conducted before. And so reliability of the scale was pretty good. We conducted 59 pre and 84 post-test surveys. I can talk about that later. Attitudes towards school, family, and community were measured. And then self-reported victimization, violence, gang involvement, and crime. That's where the unique approach comes in. We want to make sure that we know how much change is taking place in students' ability to identify whether they're being victimized more or less over time. And then we also did not want to just stop with a survey. We wanted to really get in on the ground, roll up our sleeves, hang out with Ismail, hang out with the workers, with the students, go on field trips. So we ended up at places like USC. We ended up conducting workshops with the students. And this was a team of about 6 graduate students and myself. We interviewed 40 students. We conducted 10 focus groups. And then we analyzed grades, citizenship, and suspension data. And just to let you know, from the very beginning, I was very skeptical. No program, gang prevention program at least, has shown change within 6 months of academics. And sure enough, we found no change in citizenship, suspension data, but we found a little bit of an increase in 25% of the students in grade point average. So the findings, this is just a little taste. You've read the report, so you can ask me questions later about more specific findings. The outreach worker appears to be meeting the school district's objectives to connect target students to school. Now that's sort of a broad sort of way of asking for an outcome. And the way we measured it again was through this: do I want to do well in school? And I'll come back to that. Students reported less delinquency, victimization, and gang involvement 6 months after the outreach worker made contact with them. Couple more. Outreach workers' motivational approach is consistent with evidence-based programming. This is sort of the gang research, gang prevention work. It's really in there with these approaches and what they recommend. And the program has been found as overall effective based on the improvement of student levels of self-esteem, educational attitudes, and self reported decrease in negative gang behaviors. So it's a unique program, a unique approach. Overall, we found some pretty interesting changes in the students' attitudes and perceptions. These are just some examples. Please don't kind of generalize the study based on these 3 examples, okay? This is just one question out of 72 questions, right? In wave 1, we asked, do you want a high school diploma, community college, some community college, bachelor's degree, grad degree? As you can see, many of them just wanted a little bit, a high school diploma and a little bit of college. By wave 2, you see that a big chunk of them wanted a bachelor's degree or at least community college degrees. Students find sessions with Ismael to be very helpful. Wave 1 in May, 67% of them. Wave 2, 83% of them. Now, I have to tell you that wave 2 was a much bigger number of students that we surveyed. And then students finding discussion topics to be very relevant to their experience. 62% in May, 80% in November. And then one final example. Grades are important to me. In the pretest in May, only 26% of the same students reported, or the same group of students reported that grades were important to them. And then by the post-test, 71% reported that grades were important to them. And I just have a couple more slides and I'll open it up for questions. So what are the limitations? The caseload is huge. If you ask the outreach worker, he'll tell you he has over 100 students. No gang prevention program that has this motivational approach, that has a case management approach, has that many students. The only program that I know that has this many cases is probation officers. And that's not what I think the intention of the school district to build. There's also this interesting phenomenon. This is important. It's in the literature. Differentiating between dreamers and strivers. We believe that students, the program has converted many of the students into dreamers. And a lot of us might say, hey, that sounds great. They want to go to college. They're wearing, one day we did a focus group. 9 of them were wearing UCLA sweaters. And we asked them, why are you wearing these sweaters? And they're like, because we're going there. Well, they had just come back from a field trip where they got to see UCLA, got to talk to people that had lived sort of the street life and ended up changing and going to UCLA, and their aspirations were built. However, the literature shows that in order to really connect students to school and to making those changes in grade point average and attendance is also connecting them to being strivers. And these are students that know exactly what steps it takes to get that A, what steps it takes to get to college. And so the question is, do the students know the steps that it takes to make it to the next level? Because one thing is to have the dream, another thing is to actually take the steps to accomplish it. So that's the question that came up for us. And then the data concerning relationships with teachers has not shown improvement. In other words, students' perceptions of their relationships with teachers wasn't that good, and it's still not that great. And so we don't know what's going on there, and we're trying to figure out how the program can help them establish better relationships with teachers. But we also make recommendations because of observations and reports by students that many of the teachers might have negative relationships with the students. At least that's the perception. But on a positive note, when we asked the students if they could count on one teacher at school that they could rely on and talk to, they said yes. All right, that's the end of my report.
Do we have public comments on this? Or does the board want to go into it first, or do we have any public comments? Do we have public comment? No public comments? Okay. Mr. Gonzalez, do you have anything further?
I think I will share with you that the recommendation is for the board to accept the report. I also would like to share with you that we are in negotiations with the city to continue this program with funding from the city. It is an MOU that we originally thought would be available at the February 2nd special board meeting. It came to our attention that we may not be able to meet that deadline, but I'm just giving you a heads up that we will be coming with an MOU between the city, the Santa Barbara County Education Office, and ourselves to continue the work that's currently being performed by our gang outreach consultant.
This is a conference item. Does the board take action on a conference item like this?
No, there won't be any action. Of course, you can indicate your feelings about it and indicate direction for us.
Comments? Dr. Noel?
Professor Rios, thank you very much for the work you did. I think the report is most interesting indeed. I would disagree with the gentleman behind you, Mr. Gonzalez, in the sense that I think that simply let the board accept the report is far too little. I'm intrigued by two of your recommendations. I like the whole approach. I looked at this whole project at the outset being very skeptical about a case management approach, and I didn't, I'm looking for bigger numbers, and I think I'm persuaded by this experience and our conversations that this doesn't work that way. So I particularly then look at, I see this as really addressing not the outcomes that we all dream about, us as dreamers, higher scores, tangible outcome measures, but addressing the risk factors. And in that sense, it seems very appropriate that you would recommend things that seem terribly modest, but I'm looking particularly like collaboration with teachers.
What page, Dr. Noel?
I'm on page 44, bottom paragraph. And again, that theme appears on page 45. Basically, that a crucial element here has to do with the relationship between these kids and teachers. Now, it's a relationship. There are two parties to a relationship. And somehow that's a dimension that I think is amenable to policies, or that we as a board and as a district could start thinking about concrete steps to move in that direction. And I think that is a very important contribution that you called our attention to that.
Thank you.
Another one is this is just nitty-gritty stuff, but it resonates well with me. A place to meet. Is there a place that these kids, if we want them to connect with school, I think in this particular case, maybe we need to be encouraged by having a place to connect. And maybe it could relate to the first recommendation, something to do with enhancing the relationship with teachers. But people I've talked to who are knowledgeable about this community say that there's part of the problem is there's no sense of ownership. And you might say, well, why would they get a room and other people not get a room? Well, these kids need a sense of ownership and involvement that the demand is much greater than it is for a lot of other kids. So I would love to see us as a board and as a district try to move ahead on these, and maybe I'm missing some other more nuanced recommendations here, but those who just left off the page at me, and we can do something about that, and I would certainly encourage us to do so. And thank you again for calling our attention to that. It's an excellent study. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Mrs. Parker?
I want to say thank you as well for all the work that you've done and all the meetings that you've attended just here at the district office. And that's just a very small fraction of what you've been doing. It's been tremendously helpful for me and for Mrs. Cordero. We've been sitting on that committee. And And I've been so glad because, again, as Dr. Noel said, we sort of jumped into this with some reservations. And so it's been terrific to have this evaluation process going on where we can look back on it. And I think what it shows is that there's success and there's a lot still to do. And a tremendous opportunity for streamlining, improving, expanding the program. And I agree with Dr. Noel's points about the recommendations that you brought up. I'm concerned, and I think that we need to not just look at the MOU with the city. I want to be, I'm hoping maybe Mr. Gonzalez can answer this, because I would really, I don't know how Mr. Huerta's position is funded. Is there going to be a cutoff where he can't work for a few weeks? How long is his position funded through? Because I'm really concerned that there not be any lapse in services to students.
We are in the process of developing a budget in support of the MOU. We currently believe that we have about $45,000 that can be directed to this continued work. The MOU, when presented to you, will stipulate the length of time. Very preliminary estimates indicate that we're talking about 6 to 7 months, including a budget to operate the events, the field trips, the projects that our specialist has been involved in.
Okay. Because I think it's time not just to look at that MOU, but to revisit the bigger picture again, and to see some of the things that we talked about, the initial report that you did over almost 3 years ago now, Mr. Gonzalez, on gang intervention, what's been changed. We know that there's some programs coming in, what Dr. Rios refers to here in terms of collaboration with teachers. I mean, there's a whole teacher professional development component that needs to be addressed, and funding sources for all these things. The outside agencies are going to be helpful for part of it, but we need to look at a board, what we're able to do. And I think it's time for us to step back and take the bigger picture too. So I hope that comes forward to us. But in the meantime, it's really helpful to see this and to see what's been going on and where we're heading with it.
Mrs. Deacon?
I'd like to echo the sentiments that have already been expressed. We read a lot of dry things in this job, and I have to tell you, I loved reading this. I mean, it really came alive for me. And I wasn't on the board when this job position was created, but it was right around that time frame. And I also had some concerns about the undefined nature of it. But I think the organic, ground-up approach really worked, where Ishmael went out, found out exactly what needed to be done, and kind of built the program from the ground up. The comments about the teacher collaboration piece, I think, are particularly important, because I think now that we've come as far as we have, it's important to keep going. And so you had entertained questions. How would you see developing that collaboration? What form might that take?
I think that going back to what Dr. Noel said, he said it's modest, and yes and no, because it's a huge thing to ask also, but I think there's simple steps in place that can happen. I've seen studies that show that when there's actually conversations with teachers about, and especially from other teachers that are successful, because every school has 1 or 2 successful teachers with this particular population. When those teachers do in-service with their other colleagues, and there's sort of that openness to listen to what best practices are taking place in the school already, I think that's one strategy. I could definitely give you other ideas for other strategies, but I believe in sort of building stuff that's already working here. And so I know that we could point, I know that Mr. Huerta can point to 1 or 2 teachers at each school that's already doing really good with the students. And so if we can have those teachers, present to the rest of the colleagues, I think that might be a good start.
That sounds like a good plan, and I do also feel a sense of urgency in making sure that this keeps going. I mean, so many of the things almost seem like common sense, but no one's done them yet, and you know, we know that kids really just need someone who really cares about them, you know, and I think that that's the role that this has played, and then this whole connection between the attachment to school and family and community, and the gains were so impressive with the community participation. So I think the teacher piece concerns us probably, or, you know, it is of concern, but I think that there's a good way to approach that, and I also suspect that there's a lot of students who are not in this category who might also say the same thing about their teachers as well, whether it's true or not. So anyway, thank you very much for this. I really have appreciated it.
Thank you.
Mrs. Cordero?
Well, I also want to thank you very much, and thank you particular, Dr. Rios, but also colleagues, your students, and Mr. Huerta as well, because I know a lot of work went into this, and I know that there was a lot of pressure to produce something that would really capture what has been going on in a relatively short period of time. And you identified it at the outset, I think, that you were being asked to evaluate something that hadn't been happening for very long, and it's very difficult to develop a mechanism for doing that. So I really appreciate the fact that you did it so well. I want to echo what everybody else has said, and I said this to you earlier, that it was just incredibly readable. And it, as Ms. Deacon said, we tend to get documents and reports that are very dry, and this really put things into context and helped to understand. But I also want to maybe compliment Mr. Huerta as well, because I know that, and Mr. Gonzalez as well, that when we were establishing and discussing establishing this position, there was a lot of concern about how it would function. And I know Mr. Gonzalez and I had an idea of what we called the Ross Castro model. There was certainly a question in my mind whether we could recapture that, given that there were new demands and new requirements and sort of new expectations. And I really feel like, looking at the report, we have not only recaptured that, but we built on it and enhanced it. And I give a great deal of credit to Mr. Huerta, who's the person who interacts with all those students, but also to Mr. Gonzalez and to the rest of the group that's been involved in this in terms of establishing it and helping it get implemented. I really appreciate your recommendations. I know that we've talked in the committee about that in some schools there's been a great deal of collaboration with administration, with teachers, et cetera, and those schools have had a bit more success with the students. And so it's very clear that the schools where that hasn't been as well established, that it probably would be beneficial to the students as well as to the school to make that happen. And I also want to anonymously appreciate the students who are involved in this, because this really does take some commitment on their part. And it's, you know, Mr. Huerta has done a great job of inspiring them, but they've stepped up to the plate as well and done this. And I just wanted to highlight one of the comments that I felt was so wonderful in this, that came from one of the students. And it was after they had gone on a field trip to Homeboy Industries. And he said, he started out by saying how interesting it was to see all these different people getting along. And I thought it was interesting to say, when he said, everybody got along instead of fighting. It trips you out because you see all these fools that are like from different hoods, and they actually give them opportunities. Not like other people look at them as different people and they don't want to give them jobs, and they have helping hands, helping everyone. And then later a student says, the stories of these people that they're telling us, like it kind of makes you think, kind of makes you think, like if you want to be in a gang, if you don't, or what are the consequences for being in a gang. And to me, that's exactly where we wanted to get students, to that idea of really thinking about what this all means and recognizing that there are some possible opportunities beyond this. So I appreciate the report, I appreciate the work that you're doing, and I really do hope that we will continue to. I appreciate the city's willingness to collaborate with this as well.
Thank you.
Can I say one
Surely.
thing? I do want, I don't know where the process is with the city, the county, the funding situation. And just as the evaluator, I just want to caution, and I've seen this happen before, in nonprofits we call it the sunset dilemma, which is, you get a 3-year grant and the sun sets and then it's gone, and the kids, it's worse to have had the program because now they don't believe in anyone, because whoever comes they don't trust, because whoever was there left them hanging. And so I don't want it to become, I want to caution the board and the community on this phenomenon that happens often, and that is that a foundation or a local government or a school district will say, oh, look, they have money, let them take care of it. Or look, and I don't know, I have not seen this happen here, but I've seen it happen elsewhere. And I just want to make sure that we make sure that when we pass the baton over, it doesn't fall. And that can happen based on previous situations in other cities. Thank you.
I'll comment. Obviously, we're all very, very impressed by the report and the activity and what's going on. I get the feeling, reading the report, that there was some trepidation going into this, and there wasn't a full-fledged support from a multitude of people. So I hope that if it goes forward, that we can give you more help and give more incentivize the teachers and the principals to interact and be more receptive. But in light of your last comment, I'll make it just be really clear. I was very vocal at the time that this is a community problem. It's not a school district problem, and the school district can't continue funding indefinitely. We have $5 or $6 million we have to cut next month. And so this all fits into that. But it's been my position, it's a community problem, and the community has to step forward and work together. It's very hard for me to justify this kind of money from a school district standpoint, especially if we want to expand into other schools, all the schools, elementary schools, more people. That may not be realistic if it's purely school district. That's just in comment to what you just said.
Could I comment as well?
Dr. Sarvis?
I'd like to thank the board for going with us on this. We brought you a proposal, we changed that proposal, we paired it, and the board was willing to run with the program that we were going to grow on the run. And to some extent, there was a Ross Castro element to this. It really depends on Ross Castro. It does depend to some extent on finding the right kind of person who can connect with kids, who can work with them, talk with them, and get them to start thinking differently about what they're doing. Our next step on this will be to take this study and the findings back to the South Coast Gang Task Force, because we've had a number of discussions about this, and one of the things we wanted to demonstrate was that an approach like this can work. It can be effective, and we do believe that the community needs to step in. We're very pleased at this point that the city is willing to use CalGRIP money and continue this position and bring us an MOU so that we could simply continue it for some 6 months, 8 months. But unless we do get wider support from the community, I've already told the South Coast Gang Task Force that we are going to be looking for major cuts in February. Of course, many of them are too. The city's looking at major cuts. But we do have other people who sit on that committee. We have other foundations, we have other organizations, and we think we need to develop a joint budget to not only continue to support this, but expand this service. We think we need more people like this.
Mrs. Parker.
Well, I just want to bring up also that obviously it is a community-wide issue. Our business is education, and we have the kids for a large chunk of the day. So it makes a lot of sense for us to be involved with this, but it does need to come from a lot of different agencies in order to support them. And I so appreciate all the ones that have been participating in the process. That has made a huge difference. But at this point, Dr. Rios, your evaluation process is at an end, but we can't stop. And I want to be sure that we put the tools in place so that some of the things that you haven't seen yet in terms of things like truancy, absenteeism, GPAs, that we do in the long run see that. Because ultimately we need to have, it can't just be about attitudes changing, we need to see some concrete results in terms of their education. And so I hope that we don't lose sight of that and think of this as an end. It's really just a first step.
Dr. Noel.
Yes, I wanted to talk about D16 on the consent agenda because one thing that I noticed in there is that there's in the categorical program, there was no money mentioned for the school safety program. And this is a question because I can't think of a better use of the school safety money. And yes, the community is a community problem and so on, but if we still have school safety funds coming in, then it seems to me like a pretty good claim on some of that kind of money. But why was that not in the CONAP? There was no page for school safety.
It's a different topic. Can we?
Well, no, it's directly related. I want to know if there's school safety money we can use to fund some of these things.
May I comment? There actually is, and I do not recall the exact page, but you may see under Title IV that there is a carryover of approximately $20,000. You'll see in a box that explains that we do plan to utilize those funds to continue the gang intervention prevention program.
That's this 45 that you're talking about, that you mentioned earlier?
No, it's a separate Title IV funding that's embedded in the CONAP that was approved earlier. And my point is that, as you know, we were charged with also establishing a prevention program at the elementary district. We will be presenting you, the two board members that sit on the committee are aware that we have been moving in that direction for some time. There are some additional costs involved that we plan to support through that Title IV carryover.
But refresh my memory, Title IV, that's not the safe and drug-free schools.
Actually, it is, and
okay, I saw that page.
But that amount of money is seriously decreasing every single year. It's very likely that that allocation will not continue. What I am sharing with you is that we have accumulated very purposefully a carryover that will be used to primarily support the elementary intervention program.
Okay, but I mean, this is really a question that I would like to have it connected with. I would make a very concrete recommendation that we put on the agenda how we may do exactly what Ms. Parker is talking about, to not let this thing die, pick up on the more modest of the recommendations, see what we can do for finding money. I'm not saying, we used to get $175,000 a year for school safety, and I understand, and I didn't see that, and if that's gone, it's a problem. But if I hope that was an error.
No, actually, it's in Tier 3, so it's not showing up on the CAT form. It's a Tier 3 categorical, and you have a A significant amount of the expenditures for campus safety, campus assistance already tied to that money. So whatever has been left relative to the 30% reduction we took the other year on an ongoing basis already has expenditures tied to it. They're all already safety driven.
Well, I would.
So we can bring back those
Because
expenditures.
in previous years, it went to one agency. It didn't go to pay for the. We spent $175,000.
No, you're thinking
with
the
CATA.
you're thinking the YSS, and that's actually a combination of pupil retention block grant and also, I believe, Title IV. And actually, we will be bringing that forward next month.
Let me seize upon one more. I want to press this a little bit, but your Title III flexibility doesn't make a lot of sense to people. That means that if money comes in a program that may be for school safety, but now we have the ability to use it for other purposes. And I would like to re-examine that and go back to it and say, okay, but what better purpose? If there's anything that's gone into flexibility that we're branching out away from school safety with that money, I think we should re-examine that.
I think
to
you would
accomplish the goals that Ms. Parker's talking about.
I think you'll have the opportunity to do that next month, since basically when we look at things that we can use to relieve the burden on the unrestricted general fund, federal dollars are not part of that. But I think you'll see some linkage between something else we're recommending and the ability to free up those funds.
Okay. Mrs. Deacon.
It just occurs to me that given our financial constraints, that probably the most fruitful approach will ultimately be this notion of collaborating with our existing staff. I mean, taking the teachers we've already got, who we know have connected well with students, and this is not to say we do away with Mr. Huerta's position at all. I mean, I think we need, obviously, someone who can directly connect that first step with the students, but we also need to fold our own staff into this whole process, and they're already there, and it's not an additional cost. So we need to institutionalize the whole process in our existing structure.
Ms. Cordero?
I just have a quick comment, and that is that I'm listening to my colleagues, and I just want to say I don't want it to be a foregone conclusion that we think we can't fund this position on an ongoing basis. That's not to minimize our budgetary constraints. I know them, and I know we're going to be making cuts, et cetera. But I don't think I want this position to be in the mix with everything else, and not just assume that we won't fund it. I think this is an important enough position and an important enough task that we are trying to accomplish that that certainly we want to work with other entities to see if we can partner and help make that keep the funding there. But should that fall through, or should we not get the level of collaboration that we would like, I want this to still be on the table for us to consider funding, because I agree with one of the things that Dr. Rios said, and that is these students are very, very fragile in many ways. And if we pull the rug out from under them, having worked so hard to establish their trust, it won't just affect them. It will affect the entire population, because all the other students will know that happened. All the other students the students who come down the pipeline, et cetera, will know that basically what it will be seen as, because they don't know the dynamics of partnering with other funding sources, what it will be seen as is the school district failing them again. And so I really want to make sure that we keep this on the table as something that we really need to follow through with.
Thank you.
Before we leave this topic, I think we should all recognize Mr. Huerta for his fine work and express our appreciation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
As I said earlier, we're going to jump to F5. It's been on the agenda for probably 5 meetings, and I'm not going to put it at the very end. And I apologize to the special ed. but
And facilities.
I'm going to let Eric Smith talk about parent pay transportation.
Thank you. Last spring, as part of our fiscal solvency plan, the board adopted a parent pay transportation program based on a rate of $250 per rider per year, hoping to generate about $25,000 annually. I'm here to report about what we learned and hopefully make some recommendations about how we go forward. So let's start with what we learned. The first thing we learned is we had absolutely no data on ridership. We had no idea who rode what bus, went from point A to point B. We also learned we had no systems in place. Given the fact that we had no grasp on data, and that made it challenging to develop systems to identify who should be charged, who should be exempt, based on both statute and board policy. And as we went through this process, we found board policies that we weren't even aware of. So that was an enlightening experience in and of itself. We also found that we had no mechanism, and what I mean by mechanism, no enforcement mechanism. Even if we could implement what we wanted to implement in the best of all possible worlds, what were we going to do when people refused to pay? Obviously, we're not going to leave students on the side of the road. So that was a whole nother ethical dilemma. Well, we managed to get through most of those hurdles, and I'm going to let Julie Nemus, our internal auditor, who played a critical role in developing the systems, gaining data, and doing a lot of the discovery in this, to talk about all the data that we did collect and share that with you. But in the final analysis, we're going to recommend that we abandon the parent pay transportation program, but in lieu of that, we have some other ideas that we believe will not only generate $25,000, but probably much more based on conservative estimates. But we'll have a continuum of recommendations, and I'm going to let Julie come up and talk about the data. And as you can see, she put together a very good report. For those of you who have not met her, this is Julie Nemus, our internal auditor, which we also stole from the county education office. And she's well equipped to present this. Julie.
Good evening, members of the board. I'm going to give you a really brief overview of the process we went through and the results of our review of all of the transportation applications. In October and November, we received all of the bus applications, started to review them, and this was eligibility for Roosevelt, Monroe, Adams, and Washington. And we looked at pretty much two levels of eligibility. First, whether or not they were eligible to receive transportation, and I'll get into those requirements in a minute. Second, if they selected free transportation, were they eligible for an exemption? So they no longer had to pay that $250, or they wouldn't have to pay that $250 fee per year. The first item, are they eligible to receive transportation? There's a couple requirements. According to board policy, students are eligible for transportation if the distance between their school-established bus stop and the school is more than 3 miles, and the student is not an inter- or intra-district transfer. There are also applicants that would be exempted from this 3-mile requirement. There's 4 different items. If there's special education students requiring transportation per their individual educational plan or IEP. If they're an intra-district program improvement transfer, a PI transfer, an intra-district transfer due to displacement, their home school is full. And the final one are the Monroe and Washington students residing in the new attendance boundaries that were established in 1986. That kind of gives you what the first item we talked about, are they eligible to even receive transportation? If they are eligible to receive transportation, then the second item is, are they required to pay that $250 fee, or are they exempt? And the exemptions include those 4 requirements I just discussed. In addition, they can be exempt if they are eligible for free or reduced meals. So we received about 339 applications and reviewed them. Out of this 339, and there's a table in the proposal, I believe it's actually it's on the bottom of page 1, where it talks about the 3-mile requirement results. Out of 339 applications, 152 actually failed the 3-mile requirement. 181 were exempt for those requirements I already discussed. 0 met the 3-mile requirement. So those that were not exempt, none of them were more than 3 miles. and 6 did not provide their school, so we were unable to do a full test on those 6. Out of those 339 applications, only 8 selected the $250 payment. That goes back to what Eric was saying, was that we were going to propose to abandon the proposal because our estimated revenues for 9-10 are $2,000, a bit less than the $25,000 projected. Based on these results, there's numerous options, as Eric mentioned. We do, first and foremost, we recommend abandoning the parent paid transportation, but we do recommend that we enforce the 3-mile requirement. It is in our board policy, we just haven't been enforcing it. Another recommendation or proposal is that we use Title I revenues to fund transportation costs for PI transfers. Program requirements allow us to do this, and right now we are not using any Title I funds for this, so we would recommend transferring those from the general fund over to Title I as a set-aside for transportation. We also recommend completely eliminating the fee option, but still getting applications so that we have some sort of roster and we can work with that option. The cost to process all of the applications far outweighed the $2,000 in revenues that we'll be receiving. And we didn't actually receive $2,000 because the majority of them selected the installment method, so we only received an $85 installment.
But we did receive, one person did pay for the full year, and if the board elects to abandon, we will rebate them their second semester.
And so based on these proposals or these recommendations that we're making to you, we estimate that there could be some home-to-school transportation cost savings for 2010-11 of approximately $40,000 to $120,000. That is a very conservative estimate. There are a lot of routes that are shared with, say, Peabody or a secondary. It would take some working with STA to redo the routes. But that's based on an average per route basis. There are some additional costs. We're being charged some excess gas costs and things such as that. So like I mentioned, this is a very conservative estimate. These proposals would transfer about $35,000 to $45,000 to Title I set-aside. This is based on the applications we got. You'll notice in the proposal, and I believe it is the last page, page 3, at the very end, I talk about how there's still, based on STA numbers, approximately 100 students on the buses that we did not receive applications for. So if we did get applications for every single person, every single applicant, there could be more that would not meet the 3-mile requirement, or that would be a PI transfer. So we would have a little more information if we received applications for all.
I think one thing I would like to clarify is that right now, one of the issues with the Title I set-aside is, unless somebody declares that they're actually leaving a program improvement school, they're going in non-program improvement at the time of inter-district, we can't actually move that transportation expense. So we're working on reforming that process to make it more explicit from the onset so we can make that eligible. So I think when looking at that, we could drive that number up to about $75,000 that we could move from Title I or transportation into the Title I set-aside. And then, as Julie mentioned, there's always the option of looking at the routes. We did find through this process that when we started examining who was riding the bus, we were finding out that, we have people from outside the districts that are inter-district coming in, dropping off inside the district and piggybacking on a route. I mean, all kinds of things were coming to the light. We had no idea what were going on. But I think we've started with building a database, and as Julie said, I think we should continue to basically build the database so we have a record of what's going on, so at least we have a data management tool. But right now we're asking the board to consider the options of, anywhere on that continuum from basically looking at the Title I set-aside, which you'll see next month because that'll be in the plan. Also looking at the routes, and then probably number one would be abandoning the current program because we don't think it's going to be it hasn't been viable year to date. We don't believe it's going to be a viable program in the future.
Mrs. Parker, I told you so.
Just a little bit of I told you so. But the bigger issue for me is when I first saw this, I was shocked at this 3-mile limit, the 3-mile requirement. and it's out of AR 3541. And this is something that I was paying close attention to a number of years ago when it came before the board, before I was a board member. In fact, only Dr. Noel is still, was on the board at the time that it was previously discussed. And I thought, where did this 3-mile requirement come from? AR 3541. And what happened was, in June 2008, we revised the 3000 series. And normally with a revision, we get those notes at the front that say, a new board policy is coming in or one's being pulled out, because otherwise what you see is the strike-throughs, and that's where you know that there's a change that's being made. Well, it turned out that AR 3541 was a brand new AR, but it was not flagged, and so we didn't catch it. What had happened in over the course of about 6 months in the 2002-2003 school year, the board was cost-cutting, and it spent about 6 months looking at elementary transportation routes. In December 2002, they had transportation vector consultants come in and do a big presentation where the 3 things that the board was looking at the time was, should we eliminate some routes on a case-by-case basis because they're underutilized? Should we put in a mileage requirement for the elementary district? And if we do, should that be 1 mile or 1.5 miles? Those were the 2 that they were debating in terms of mileage requirements. And you can go back and look at the videos from the time, you can look at the minutes from the time. What the board eventually decided to do was to eliminate on a case-by-case basis and consolidate on a case-by-case basis. And they didn't put a mileage requirement in because there were so many issues around it. Sometimes it was a dangerous route. But certainly they had completely eliminated the idea of 1.5 miles because that was about a 30 to 35-minute walk for parents with young children one way, and you'd have to do that 2 ways. There's the whole issues around it. So for me, the first thing that I would like to do is request that AR 3541 come back for board review and revision, possibly to take out the mileage requirements, but we could talk about that. But the board spent a lot of time talking about this a number of years ago, and we have a lot of history that we can build on it. But I really feel like the 3-mile requirement came in sort of under the radar, probably based on the junior high, the secondary requirement, which is that it's 3 miles and then you get a reduced fee bus pass. And I think that they just got tied together.
I think that's probably right, because typically you would see the 3-mile in high schools, and 1 mile to 1.5 miles at an elementary. That's what I've seen in other districts. So we'll bring it back.
Okay. Mrs. Cordero?
Well, I know that this is on our conference agenda, but we have on occasion, and we do on occasion, take action on conference agenda items if we think that it's reasonable to do so. And I would like to put forth a motion to discontinue the parent paid transportation program.
I'll second that.
And then we can talk
Effective-
about effective immediately,
You know,
or
you're-
as ASAP.
You're not hurting staff's feelings here, because we didn't want this in the first place. So.
And then we can talk about the rest of it, at another meeting. But I think that part we can move on. However, I do, having made that motion and hearing the second, I do want to say we do have one public comment.
Okay, public comment?
Sandy Show.
The one.
She's getting a refund.
You'll notice I don't have a script. I live on Bus Route 8. My driveway is the bus stop. 12 kids get on and off that bus every day. It is 1.25 miles from the school, and it involves crossing Modoc Road, going up Las Positas, crossing the freeway and the railroad tracks. Please do not tell me, thank you, Mrs. Parker, that anybody in this room considers with any sincerity eliminating that route for children in elementary school. That's not even a safe travel route for a high schooler outside of a car. There is no way that the children on that route should be asked to give up that transportation. Ironically, the 12 kids who get on at my stop, almost none of them would qualify for free and reduced.
And that's Hidden Valley neighborhood. That's the community that the district has been actively trying to woo back into Adams School. And one of the ways that we have successfully done that is by providing transportation and making it convenient for parents to get their kids to and from school every day. That's my big thing here. When I saw 3 miles, I naturally assumed it must mean you had to live within 3 miles. When I saw that it was the opposite, I was shocked, because even if it was a safe route, tell me any kindergartner capable of traveling 2.5 miles each way to school and back for half-day kindergarten. That's ridiculous. So thank you for looking into that and bringing that up. The second question, and it's because my partners in crime back there are going, Sandy, you have to ask, are they going to give you your money back? I'm one of the 7. I paid. I filled out my form. I turned it in on time. I even brought it down here to the district office to ensure that it landed on the right desk. I made my installment payment. I never heard boo, even to tell me whether or not it had been received and was being processed after that. So the 8 of us in the district who paid money to the district for transportation would like to know, now what? Thank you.
Thank you.
You may contribute it as a donation to special education.
Let's just clarify that we're not talking about changing routes here. Only paying for what we have.
Okay, there's a motion on the floor to, what was it, Mrs. Cordero?
To eliminate the parent pay transportation program.
Immediately or retroactive to?
Now, honestly, I would ask that it include a refund for
everybody?
For the 8, because, I do think that there were parents that were waiting to see, is this going forward or is this not going forward? And I don't think it's fair that those 8 that did it on time are penalized.
We can do that.
Okay, well then I'll include that in my motion.
And I'll second that.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried unanimously. Okay, thank you very much, and I'm glad we went ahead with that and got a good discussion. Okay, F4, update on status of special education.
Good. Dave Hetjunk, our Director of Facilities, will introduce us. Oh, I'm sorry. F4. Oh, we're going on to F4.
Oh. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I'm going to F4.
Okay.
I'm going to F4.
Alyssa, Pat, sorry.
Oh.
Okay, Tom Guajardo, our Executive Director of Special Education, will introduce us.
There's more people for F3. F4. Okay. Okay.
Members of the board, Superintendent Sarvis, I come before you with some really positive news, I think. We've been trying to get the school sites and specifically the school principals more involved in special education. I mentioned in a previous meeting that we've given them complete access, read-only, to SACE, which is our special ed data management system. We have had 2 trainings. Assistant principals have shown up. Some of the high school counselors have shown up, and we met with the principals today and got some positive feedback on that training. And the second one is within the next 3 weeks, we've arranged 2 different sessions, one for the elementary, one for secondary, to go through and do some training. And both of these trainings are free to the district. The second one that I'll talk about is with our attorney, and it's on avoiding due process, being proactive, being on the front end rather than on the other end, which is already too late for students and already too late for the process. So that training has already been set up, and we've we're breaking it up because there's some issues that are more pertinent to elementary as opposed to secondary. So that's why we've divided that up. And the last piece, I wanted to give an update on activities. I think you had a previous piece of information that went out, and what you have before you tonight is more updated on the FCMAT recommendations. And basically they fell into 4 categories. A, you do have those on your table, right? Good. A, it's a one-time item and it's complete. B, it's an item that may be complete, but it's going to be ongoing. Student projections, staffing, recruiting staff, taking a look at programs and services that are needed. That's an ongoing, depending on needs of students and what has to happen. The third category is items that are in progress, that are underway. And the fourth item is those that the FCMAT stakeholder group chose as not a priority. And I don't want to go through the complete document itself, but I do want to highlight a few pages that I think are pertinent in terms of our progress toward achieving the 153 recommendations that were given by FCMAT, and we want to continue to do this at least on a monthly basis. I call your attention to page 3, where you see quite a few items on there that are already either completed or ongoing. And I'm talking about, and not that it's final, but our website has been updated. There's an organizational chart in there, names, contact people, some links to useful websites. Operating or outreach to Hispanic advocates. There have been meetings with different community groups that I've had since my arrival here. So the outreach has begun. You note ongoing because it's something that we need to continue year after year. The other page I wanted to highlight is page 7. You'll see quite a few things with the relationship with fiscal and personnel. For example, the position control that has been completed. Reports to the superintendent, to cabinet. Those are agendized on a regular basis. The Special Education Administration trained on budget. We all have access to Financial 2000 system, we the directors, and we are able to access those and access various reports. And I appreciate Meg Jatay's training on that and the support we receive from Fiscal. And that includes that number 92 on the SACS codes as part of that. And page 8. Clear procedure on the one-on-one instructional aids. We do have that. We've got staffing formulas as far as what classes, how many students, and also a procedure that is well publicized and we presented to the principals and staff as far as when there's a request for an instructional assistant for a student. As far as personnel, number 86, in terms of openings that do come up, and now that we have the other 2 directors on board, whether it's elementary or secondary, they're in the loop as well. And we take a look at the request. You know, is it a new position? Is it a replacement? Is it a retirement, resignation, and so forth? So that's in place. I'd like to draw your attention to page 11. The new reorganization with the elementary special ed director and the secondary special ed director, obviously that's been completed. Realign job responsibilities. One of the things that we've done on the organizational chart that is on the website, our next step on that, because right now there's just a brief description of what each of those positions does. What we've met with Barbara Chiani and with Linda Steele on is to be able to actually have the job description there. And you go to that position, you're able to click down a menu and all the responsibility comes down so people know, you know, if they've got questions, who they need to go to, and all the names and numbers are listed there on the website. Next page I'd like to draw your attention to is 12. Quite a few things in progress there. And that includes some of the presentation that was done at the last meeting regarding the FCMAT update, and then there was a vision statement in there that you saw. Talks about the reorganization. And the last page I'd like to draw your attention to is 13. Quite a few items on there that are in progress. Begin recruiting for special education positions. We have been fortunate through our recruiting efforts. We were short a visual impaired teacher, and they're very hard to find. And we just signed one for the fall of 2000, the 2010-11 school year, and she is absolutely outstanding. And we're very fortunate to have her. So we've started the recruitment already. A regular item on our meetings with the program specialists, with the directors, with staff, speech language pathologists, psychologists, is looking at 2010, 2011, looking at student projections, looking at staffing, looking at who's coming back, looking at program, looking at services. So we've begun to do that and plan for the following school year. And in doing that, we've been able to, the other addition, even this time of year, we've been short a speech language pathologist. We just hired an outstanding person, and we had our speech language chairperson sit in on that, and one other speech language pathologist sit in on that personnel, and they've also signed. So that's just within the last week or so that we've been able to hire these two difficult to fill positions, and they're both outstanding people. So we've started the recruitment efforts already for next year. The lead nurse position closed on Friday. We'll be doing some paper screening on that as well. So we're moving on the allocated positions. Interpreters, translators. We have in the ARA budget additional resources available for interpreters at school sites. We know that sometimes instructional assistants or office staff stays in, but they need to leave at a certain hour. So we have notified principals there is money for them. Translators, we've been able to streamline the entire system so it's electronic now, where a report comes from the school site, comes into my administrative assistant, and then from there it goes straight to the translator. And we've got a turnaround right now of about 5 or 6 days. We'd like to keep working on that, but it's all handled electronically so that when it comes back, we keep a copy, we log everything that comes in, and a copy of that translated document goes back to whoever sent the report. So I think we got a pretty good handle on the interpretation translation piece. And that's pretty much it on the updates, and I do want to continue to come back at least on a monthly basis and update where we are. So I'll entertain questions at this point.
Do we have public comment? Yeah, let's take public comment before we.
Okay.
Good evening. Tonight I come before you as the president of the Special Ed Advisory Council, and my comments tonight reflect both sentiments and consensus of the council. First, I'd like to ask that the board approve the addition of a once-a-month 5 to 10-minute update from the Special Ed Council monthly, so that we can update you on what we're accomplishing, report on the barometer of special education parents, and give you an overview of what steps we're taking to accomplish the goals that are outlined in your handout. The board of the Special Ed Advisory Council met on January 18th and brainstormed to come up with a series of goals that the group would like to accomplish and measure for this year. In your handout, you can review those goals, and we welcome your opinions and feedback. I'd like to speak on the parent resource position. It's the opinion of the Special Ed Advisory Council that at this time, when the position was initially developed, the special ed administrative positions were unfilled, and parents needed some mentoring and guidance. At that time, we only had interim directors, and there was a discouraging lack of communication between the district and the parents. A parent resource person was hired and given 15 hours a week to mentor parents, but the person didn't have access to a computer, 15 hours isn't enough, and the law was lacking. So needless to say, this position was put on the back burner until we'd done some hiring and vacant positions were filled. So now that we're fully staffed, the Special Ed Advisory Council feels that we don't need that position right now. In fact, we feel like the approved funding should be pushed over to the Ombudsman. And it's our opinion that hiring someone simply to fill that slot when there's no clear job description and no candidate familiar enough with the law to be of genuine benefit to parents is a waste of resources. Although we appreciate the board's intent to assist parents with their individual education challenges, the parent resource position is just another district employee who will report to the superintendent and to the special ed executive director. Many parents won't feel comfortable with this position, discussing their ongoing issues and situations with someone who depends on the district for their employment. Some parents also believe the district would be engaging in a conflict of interest by hiring this individual directly, given that his or her job would include assisting the parents in advocating for their children's needs and holding the district accountable. On a positive note, we want to take a moment to acknowledge an example of a great teacher. Marilyn Lauer was newly transferred to Peabody this year, and during her short time at that school, she has single-handedly taken it upon herself to mentor and train her instructional assistants. By doing so, the parents have seen a refreshing change in the effectiveness of the staff. Parents have noted that their children are talking more, and the parents themselves have had to do much less facilitation of school personnel than in previous years. Finally, we would like to commend Dr. Carrie Mills on launching the Autism Classroom at Cleveland. Although it had a rocky beginning and is still very much a work in progress, the parents are hopeful that its presence will mark the beginning of a more appropriate, inclusive education for those children with autism. So thank you, Dr. Mills, for your ongoing commitment to children and families. So the last page are the goals of the Special Ed Advisory Council. And just a couple of things. We understand there's going to be a Disability Awareness Day, and we've offered to help in organizing that. And Robin and Michael have given all of our information to the principals, and I've already gotten a couple of emails from the principals, so that's great. And it's agreed that we're going to have a monthly meeting, a monthly community meeting, at which we'd like to have a district representative there, if possible. And we're working to collaborate with all the stakeholder meetings and committees and continuing our work. And we want to thank all of you for this last year and a half.
Thank you, Mrs. Zabaka, very much. Any other public comment? Any questions or comments to Mr. Guardo? I don't see any offhand, but I'll just make one. I appreciate very much the update of this document from 2 weeks ago. And comparing this against that, there were a lot of changes in that timeline column. In fact, there were, quite a few changes. I would presume in the future there may not be as many, and I would appreciate whoever writes this if they could bold the change, because comparing 15 pages of information back and forth takes time, and if I could look at just the items that were changed, it would make it a little easier. So it shouldn't be that major of a problem to make it bold.
We can do that.
But I appreciate very much. If this is the format you're going to use, then great. Just go forward and do it.
Okay.
Dr. Noel?
Thank you. I too appreciate receiving this. There's no date on it, and I want to put a date on it.
This is as of this morning. And
Okay.
what we did is we have the 4 different subgroups that have been meeting. We contacted those chair people as well as other departments that are involved and received an update on this. So I incorporated their input before I finalized that this morning.
Yeah. The point is,
Pardon me?
the document should have a date.
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely.
Oh, my. I missed that.
There's a date on the front that
You
says
mean
the
it's right
attachment.
there on the front page, staring me in the face?
Yeah,
I was looking at the tables inside, and in particular the timeline column. I counted over 50 projects that are in progress or ongoing.
1.5 or 5.0?
50.
5.0 plus.
Okay.
Okay. Which then raises a question in my mind, how are you organized? I mean, who's doing all this? So, because doesn't that consume a lot of resources?
Well, it's coming through three different avenues. Number one, the entire FICMAT group will continue to meet. Our next meeting is February 17th at 3:30. The 4 subgroups will continue to meet. Matter of fact, programs and services is meeting this Thursday, so they'll continue to meet. And the third avenue where we receive this is the follow-ups, because there's other departments involved in this. So that's my follow-up with those departments as far as a status on where they're at toward progressing toward accomplishing those.
Well, let me take number 9 on page 5, just arbitrarily. Strive to convey at least 3 consistent themes to families, and then it gives the themes. In progress. I don't know what that means, in progress. I mean, does that mean that mean they're writing this up as a message to send out, or that it's a process of dissemination, or it's being incorporated in some broader package that's going to go out?
As
get a more tangible feel for what in progress or ongoing means, and particularly, what kind of demands it's placing on your staff.
What that means is we've started to share that with the different staff. For example, we meet on a regular basis, on a monthly basis with the department chairs. We meet on a monthly basis with the psychologists, with the nurses, with the speech language pathologist. And these have been messages to them from the beginning when I started. In addition to that, on a monthly basis, I come in, and the other special ed directors do also, and we present to the principals on certain topics, themes. It could be compliance issues and so forth. So we've got the information on there. The next step is to be able to put some of this information on our website.
Well, let me take another example that's less informational, but basically what I'm getting at here is I see our specific individuals assigned these various tasks, whether it be 87 on page 7 or 61 on page 8, they say ongoing. Does that mean that there's somebody in your office that has that staff assignment, and then, and then how do you manage that kind of workload thing? And I'm saying this in sympathy, because as I look at this and as I look at all the tasks, I see an enormous amount of work, and I wonder whether we're expecting too much in too short a time, or whether the staff resources are available to do all this. It's a lot of work. Some of them are really quick and discreet. Do it, publish the email address. Bingo, that's done. Took 5 minutes, nothing more. But others are, as you say, ongoing. Some of them are multi-year. Is there someone, have you broken these down and assigned them to certain people so that they're responsible for honchoing these things through? Or?
Well, as I mentioned, with the 4 subgroups continuing to meet, and I will set up a meeting with each of those chair people, because a lot of these will fall within those 4 groups.
Yeah, but
and
they
those
don't
subgroups,
implement, do they?
Pardon
Do
me?
the subgroups implement?
Those subgroups will take this, per the update at the last board meeting. The subgroups are actually going to be the work group that take this document and make it into an action plan.
Thank you very much.
But your staff is doing most of the, I mean, this is part of their job.
Yes.
Most of these things in progress flow through your staff.
Correct.
And you.
Correct.
Yeah. So the staff these are things normally the staff would be doing in their everyday job, in many
Correct.
cases.
There's other departments involved, but it is
Yeah.
running through the special education department, yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
We'll go back to, no, excuse me, F3, I'm sorry.
So, should we let Tom Guajardo introduce this one? Dave Hetyunk, and I think we lost our chair, didn't we? Okay. Dave Hetyunk will introduce this. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Sarvis. As indicated in the cover memo, the board decided to create a surplus facilities committee to look at rental of this property and also Parma school site. Pat Saley was hired to facilitate that committee, and she's here tonight. The report from Alyssa Hummer is an attachment. She was the committee chair. The report gives the final recommendations. And just as a quick comment on leased portables in the district, the County Office of Education has offered to sell us for $1 the 2 portables that are currently at Peabody. And so those will no longer be leased portables, and we're also planning to send one of those back to the leasing company this coming summer. So next fiscal year, we'll be down to 2 leased portables in the elementary and none in the secondary. And so slowly but surely, we're trying to eliminate those. And it's great that they offered to sell that for $1, in spite of the fact that Mr. Smith keeps stealing their employees. So they've been very generous in their offer, and so we really appreciate that. The final recommendations, if I could, just before Pat comes up, on the last page of the attachment before the minutes, basically is asking the board at this time to do nothing, to to look at economic factors which may happen in the future as far as vacancy rates and enrollment and the district's financial status. And so I'll turn it over to Pat Saley so she can give some comments, and then Pat or I would be more than happy to answer any questions concerning the recommendations. I'll keep it short due to the late hour.
Good evening. Mr. President, right?
Yeah.
Members of the board. We were last here in June. The District Advisory Committee, which is comprised of 11 people representing various professional perspectives. Almost all the people on our committee were parents who have had kids in the Santa Barbara schools, and all of them very much strong supporters of public schools. So it was a good group, very much community-minded, and we were very gung-ho to find a way to get you some more money. And that was our charge, specifically to look at possibly moving the district office over to Santa Barbara Junior High, where it was until 1998, and also look at the Parma Children's Center over on East Montecito Street. We had 5 meetings up through about a year ago, and then we realized we really needed some more information. So we held off on our 6th meeting until the fall, until November. The primary, well, 2 primary reasons. One was to see what's happening with enrollment, and as you well know, that's such a sort of crystal ball kind of thing. And added layer of sort of uncertainty in terms of the elementary district shifting into basic aid status, and what might that mean for enrollments. As I understand it, there's still some unknowns related to that. I mean, enrollment in general is somewhat unknown, but specifically as it relates to that. In the course of our discussion, we toured and talked a lot about Santa Barbara Junior High. My son happened to be there the last year that the district office was there, so I remember that from a parent perspective, and it really wasn't a big deal, but it was already there, so I hadn't known it any other way. John Becchio was on our committee. He was a teacher there at that time, so we had good info in terms of how it worked. We talked about really practical things. Meeting space in this building is at a premium, and a space to have a board meeting. You sometimes have big crowds. I know this is shocking, but the Globe Theater is very small, or the Globe Meeting Room, I guess it is. Marjorie Luke is there, but there's some costs involved with that. So we tried to be very practical. We looked at the needs of the staff that is here, who needs to be here, who could be farmed out to another site. We spent a lot of time talking about the various school campuses and how many classrooms are available, and class size reduction entered the picture. That was one of the moving targets we were dealing with. Capacity issues, that's always an interesting one. The reality is, while like in the elementary, the primary grades, class sizes have gone up, fewer classrooms are used for K through 3, the newly vacant classrooms tend to be dispersed throughout the district. And then, as Dave just said, there's a real push to return leased portables. That's a way to save money. And those programs go into these newly vacant classrooms. So it's not like one school is sitting half empty and wholesale move of some program could occur. It's not that simple. We looked at the likely revenues, and there were a lot of assumptions went into that. We looked at the costs of moving staff here over to the junior high. There are some programs there that in turn would have to be moved elsewhere. All of these represent costs, and we wanted to make sure that likely revenues would make those costs be worthwhile. And the bottom line is really that the office vacancy rate is too high right now to rationalize making this change. And we wanted to recommend something to help the general fund, but we had to be practical about it. And our feeling was it's premature right now. And maybe in a year, if vacancy rates for office space decrease, the demand increases. I mean, that's just really the basic issue here. We had people who are in real estate, 3 different people who are very knowledgeable about real estate, including from the downtown organization, and Mark Ingalls, who's affiliated with Camino Real, and Rob Ramirez, who knows a lot about this stuff as well. And they said there's just not enough demand to talk about this right at this minute. And maybe in a year, the committee members were very amenable to, if a year goes by and things really heat up some, we could just reconvene, don't need to start over here. Reconvene, just get new enrollment data, those sorts of things. That's not difficult. But until the market improves, we just couldn't, with a clear conscience, recommend that you spend any more time or money on looking at this. It's just the timing's wrong. It's unfortunate, but that's the way it is. And again, the committee would be happy, I think, to reconvene. We might have to fill a couple vacancies. It wouldn't be difficult. What's difficult is revving up the office leasing market, and we have obviously no control over that. So that's really where we ended up. It was a great process. I think we educated a lot of people, but timing, like everything in life. So be happy to answer any questions. Dave as well.
Any public comment? I know you spent a lot of time and effort leading this group, and we appreciate it very much. And
my pleasure.
And the logic behind your recommendations are very powerful. So, sometimes you can.
You win some, you lose some.
Yeah. So, but thank you very much for all the
You're
time and
welcome.
effort. And I apologize for the shifting of the agenda. I've been properly chastised by my group, and
it's quite all right.
We'll have to do better next time. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome.
Oh,
Thank
Mrs.
you.
Parker.
I just want to say thank you, Ms. Saley, and thanks so much to those volunteer members of the committee, including Ms. Hummer as the chair, but a terrific list of people that were willing to put their time and energy into helping out with this. Thank you, Ms. Cordero, and thank you, Mr. Wheeler. This will be a resource for us when and if things turn around.
And Mr. Herron, I'll be sending a letter of thanks to each of those people.
Thank you.
On your behalf.
Thank you.
Can I just say, one of the reasons we included the minutes is we went over a lot of territory, and while we just summarized it, but we don't want, I mean, there's no need to revisit all that, just kind of update things. We thought for posterity it would really help.
Mrs. Cordero?
Well, I just wanted to thank you also and to thank the committee, because there was a great deal of time and effort put into this, and people going on site visitations and all kinds of things. But I also wanted to say this was time, I think it was time well spent. Even though we ultimately are not going to take any action, I think there was some really good information and knowledge that was acquired through this process, not only educating the members of the committee, but I think there were some things that even as a district we weren't entirely aware of in terms of where our, where things are and how we do utilize certain sites, et cetera. So I think it wasn't a wasted effort, and I appreciate the work that went into it.
Sure. You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Item number G, I think, is the next one. And we'll go back to the consent calendar. I asked that D5 be taken off, and it was purely because I was contacted by a member of the public wanting to know the cost of changing the name. And I don't know what's involved in that, but is it a monumental cost, or is it?
No, it's not monumental. We took a look at that. It'd be the normal cost of changing the title on the side of the school, the name on the side of the school, any signage at the school, and letterhead. And we'd expect to go ahead and use up our letterhead before we use that new letterhead. So we'll be taking a look at it, and Mr. Hetjunk will be over there
If it doesn't work out, changing it back or changing the name, is that a monumental process?
Well, we could just cross out university
Okay,
partnership.
okay. I will move for approval
I'm
of
just
D5.
kidding.
I'll move approval of D5.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion passed. Dr. Noel, D7.
Yes, D7, I have a rather fundamental problem with this. If I understand the law and public policy, charter schools are considered local education agencies on par with districts. And this particular one is also an independent nonprofit corporation. Charter schools are LEAs, and this one's an independent corporation. It's also, I believe, an independent funding model. And I just can't understand, I mean, it seems to me they have to make their own application, bottom line. It's just, it's a legal issue.
I believe you're right.
And particularly, you're talking about after-school money. In fact, that's been a big issue that they were trying to get corrected, I believe, in the legislature, that charter schools were not new charter schools, which would apply to Cesar Chavez de Novo, were not even eligible to apply for after-school funds. I think that maybe have changed recently or is in the process, but it was a problem as recently as a few months ago. So I think that there's a real problem here.
Do you want this reviewed and brought back, or?
Well, we would ask you to approve the others.
Right.
And
Sure.
we'll go back to Cesar Chavez on this one.
Okay, yeah.
Do I have a motion, Mr. Noel, Dr. Noel?
Oh,
Motion.
do I have a motion? Sure, I move to approve it, deleting Cesar Chavez.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried unanimously. D9, Dr. Noel.
Okay, D9, Carpinteria, sending people in to, a small number of students, the transition program. And I got this, that zero financial impact, they're paying $13,414. My question is, does the transition program contribute to the need to make contributions from the general fund? And is there a prorated share of those contributions being charged to those people? Did I ask that clearly?
Yeah, actually, I think the way this thing is written, the fiscal impact is actually a positive 13,414. So if you're
Yeah, I
asking me
understood that.
okay, I think you're asking me, is it 13,414?
It should be more.
Well, no, that I think the way we arrived at that was their proportional share of encroachment.
That's, yes. However, I asked it.
And
you
I use that
answered it
word because I
crisply.
didn't have to say local general fund contribution right now,
Well,
given who's in the audience.
you see, it took me longer. 'cause I
Motion
was
to
trying
approve,
be
Dr. Noel?
politically correct.
Motion to approve, Dr. Noel?
I move to approve.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried unanimously. I think that's all of those. Coming events, number H. I think you went through most of them, Dr. Sarvis. Coming events?
Oh, coming events, yes, I did.
Okay. Future agenda items? Dr. Noel.
And as I already
Okay.
stated, AR 3541.
Yeah.
We have those both.
I would like this Special Education Department to look at the board brief that came out on retaliation and come back with a synopsis as for the board to determine if that is sufficient to cover retaliation, or should some change be made to incorporate verbiage or wording to expand on it, or an update on what strategies are being implemented per FICMAT to help morale and help relieve the 60% of our staff who feel there is retaliation. So I was not personally satisfied with that explanation, not from a legal standpoint, because it's probably very correct, but when you add in what's going on in our school district, do we need more verbiage in policy? So I'm not sure, when that is or how, but I'd like to come back to us. I'm not satisfied with that simple understanding of retaliation. Any
And
further?
I have just two other things.
Okay.
One is that I would remind you that we have a special meeting coming up next Tuesday. You wouldn't want to miss it. It starts early. It starts at 6 o'clock. And because we have a lot of items stacked up and we have budget cuts that are going to take a good part of the 2 regular meetings in February, I would ask you to consider an early start at those meetings, whether it's 6 or 6:30.
I mean, what's the process? Can we just do that right now, or does that have to come back to us at the next meeting?
Well, if we agree to it, then we can schedule it.
Just the 2 other February.
Yes.
The second and fourth?
The second and fourth meeting, I believe it's the 9th, and I believe it's the 23rd.
Mrs. Cordero, I know your schedule is, and Mrs. Parker, and I mean, it's everybody's schedule, but is starting at 6:30 okay, or starting at 6 okay?
Yes. For me, it is, yes.
Either one of those? Okay. Anybody else?
No, that's fine. I'm just kind of wondering in my head, since those are board adopted, those dates
What
and
we
times
would
were
need to do.
adopted, but do we need to take
That-
action on it at the February 2nd meeting? But
That's my question, too, is
Yeah.
that,
I will check.
yeah,
Mhm.
'cause you've got our thoughts. And,
Good.
okay. Anything else? Let's adjourn.